The Chinese woman they called worthless just destroyed the most powerful man in the territory. But 3 months ago, she couldn't even afford a train ticket home. Maylin Zhao arrived in Oklahoma Territory with nothing but broken dreams and a suitcase she could barely carry. The rancher who sent for her took one look and laughed in her face. "Too educated," he sneered. "I need a wife, not a school teacher." Stranded in a town that wanted her gone, she had two choices: crawl back to California in shame, or find another way to survive. What happened next changed everything, not just for her, but for everyone who ever bet against her. If you want to see how a rejected mail-order bride became the woman powerful men feared most, stay until the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Maylin's story travels. The train lurched to a stop with a screech of metal that set Maylin's teeth on edge. Through the smudged window, Oklahoma Territory looked exactly like she'd feared. Flat, brown, and unforgiving under a sky so big it made her feel like an insect about to be crushed. Dust devils spun across the platform where a handful of men stood waiting, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats. She pressed her palm against the window glass, still warm from the afternoon sun. Her reflection stared back, dark eyes rimmed with exhaustion, hair starting to escape the tight bun she'd pinned that morning in the St. Louis boarding house. 26 years old and already past what most people considered marriageable age. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Education is wasted on daughters. Should have spent that money on your brother instead." "Final stop, ma'am." The conductor's voice made her jump. He was already moving down the aisle, not waiting for a response. Maylin stood, her legs stiff from 3 days of sitting. The worn suitcase felt heavier than it had in San Francisco, weighed down not just with clothes, but with the crushing realization that this was her last option. Behind her lay a teaching position she'd lost when the school board discovered her ethnicity, a fiancé who'd broken their engagement the same week, and a family who'd made it clear she was no longer welcome to burden them with her presence. Ahead lay Samuel Morrison, a rancher who'd placed an advertisement for a hard-working, obedient wife, and had seemed willing to overlook her background when she'd answered. His letters had been brief, practical, making no promises beyond room and board in exchange for household duties. She'd read between the lines, he was desperate enough to consider her. That made them even. The platform planks creaked under her feet as she stepped down, suitcase clutched in both hands. The men who'd been waiting turned to stare. She recognized the look, that particular combination of curiosity and dismissal she'd seen countless times. One of them, a tall man with a gray-streaked beard, stepped forward. "You the Chinese woman Morrison sent for?" "I am Maylin Zhao." She kept her voice steady, her English deliberately clear. "Mr. Morrison wrote that he would meet me here." "He's here." The man jerked his thumb toward a wagon at the far end of the platform. "Over there with the others. Come on." She followed, aware of eyes tracking her movement. The wagon was surrounded by 4 more men, all studying a woman who stood in the wagon bed like she was livestock at auction. The woman, blonde, younger than Maylin, clearly terrified, kept her gaze fixed on her feet. "Morrison," the bearded man called out. "Got another one." One of the men turned. Maylin knew it was Samuel Morrison before he spoke. She recognized the sharp nose and thin mouth from the photograph he'd sent. What the photograph hadn't captured was the coldness in his eyes as they swept over her, head to toe, in 3 seconds of brutal assessment. "You're the school teacher." It wasn't a question. His voice carried the flat disappointment of a man who'd ordered one thing and received another. "I taught primary school, yes. Your letters indicated—" "I know what my letters said." Morrison climbed down from the wagon, boots hitting the ground with deliberate heaviness. He walked a slow circle around her, and Maylin forced herself to stand still, to breathe normally, to not show the panic starting to climb her throat. "How old are you?" 26. 26. He repeated it like she'd just confirmed a disease. "And you read and write English?" "Yes. Also Cantonese and some Spanish. I can keep accounts, teach children. I don't need a damn accountant." Morrison stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell whiskey on his breath. "I need someone who knows how to work, cook, clean, keep a house running. You ever milked a cow?" The question was designed to humiliate. Maylin met his gaze. "No, but I can learn." "Learn!" Morrison laughed, a sharp bark that made the other men smirk. "You hear that, boys? She can learn." He leaned closer. Let me tell you something, school teacher. Out here, we don't have time for learning. We need doing. And I need a wife who's going to pull her weight, not spend all day with her nose in books thinking she's better than everyone else. Heat flooded Mei Lin's face. I never said, didn't have to. Morrison straightened, already turning away. I can see it written all over you. Too educated, too proud, too Chinese. He waved a dismissive hand. You're unsuitable. Find your own way back to wherever you came from. The world tilted. Mei Lin's fingers went numb around the suitcase handle. Mr. Morrison, please, we had an agreement. Agreement's void if the goods don't match the description. He was already walking back to his wagon, to the blonde woman who was crying silently now. You lied about your age, probably about everything else too. I want someone young enough to give me sons, not some used-up spinster who thinks reading makes her special. I have nowhere else to go. The words came out before she could stop them, before pride could clamp down on desperation. I spent everything I had on the train fare. Mr. Morrison, I'm asking you to honor your word. Morrison didn't even turn around. Not my problem. Should have thought about that before you wasted my time. The bearded man who'd first approached her cleared his throat. Miss, you better move along. Train back east leaves tomorrow morning. There's a boarding house on 2nd Street that takes Chinese. Widow Chen runs it. I don't have money for a boarding house. Mei Lin hated how small her voice sounded. I don't have money for anything. Then you better figure something out quick. He wasn't unkind, just stating facts. Town doesn't take kindly to vagrants, especially not... He stopped, but the unspoken words hung between them anyway. Especially not your kind. Mei Lin watched Morrison's wagon pull away, the blonde woman still standing in the back, gripping the side rails. The other men dispersed, their business concluded. Within minutes, the platform was empty except for her and the bearded man, who was clearly waiting for her to leave. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward town because there was nowhere else to go. The main street of Guthrie Station was exactly what she'd expected, a single row of wooden buildings with false fronts trying to look more substantial than they were. A general store, a saloon, a telegraph office, a bank that was probably barely scraping by. Dust coated everything, and the wind carried the smell of horse manure and unwashed men. People stared as she passed. A woman in a blue calico dress grabbed her daughter's hand and pulled her close. 2 cowboys outside the saloon stopped their conversation to watch her walk by, their expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Mei Lin kept her eyes forward, her back straight, her grip tight on the suitcase that now felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The boarding house on 2nd Street was a narrow building wedged between a feed store and a shuttered storefront. A hand-painted sign over the door read, Chen's Rooms, clean beds, fair prices. Mei Lin climbed the 3 steps to the porch and knocked. The woman who answered was Chinese, probably in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back severely and eyes that took in Mei Lin's situation in one quick glance. No rooms available. Please. Mei Lin switched to Cantonese. I just arrived. I have nowhere to go. You have money? The widow responded in English, her accent thick but her meaning clear. No, but I can work. I can clean, I can cook. Everyone can clean and cook. Widow Chen started to close the door. Can't feed people on promises. I can teach. Mei Lin put her foot in the door, a move that would have horrified her mother. I taught school in San Francisco for 3 years. Reading, writing, arithmetic. If you have children, or if anyone in the area needs tutoring, nobody here wants their children taught by a Chinese woman. Widow Chen's expression wasn't cruel, just factual. White folks barely tolerate us running businesses. They're not going to pay us to educate their kids. Then I'll teach Chinese children. There must be others here. 23 families, last I counted, all working dawn to dark just to survive. They don't have time for school, and they definitely don't have money to pay for it. Widow Chen sighed. Look, girl, I understand you're in trouble, but I can't help you. I barely keep this place running as it is. Come back when you have money, and we'll talk. The door closed. Mei Lin stood on the porch, staring at the worn wood, feeling the last thread of hope fray and snap. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. She turned to find a man standing at the bottom of the porch steps. He was probably in his late 30s, tall and lean in the way of people who work hard and don't eat quite enough. Sun-weathered skin, brown hair going gray at the temples, hands that bore the calluses and scars of ranch work. His clothes were clean but worn, not poverty, just practicality. "Excuse me, ma'am." His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Couldn't help but overhear. You're looking for work?" Maylin's chest tightened with a different kind of fear. She'd heard the stories, women in her position being approached by men who saw desperation as opportunity. She straightened, trying to look less vulnerable than she felt. "I'm looking for honest work. Teaching, preferably. Not offering anything else?" The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes looked almost embarrassed. "Name's Caleb Turner. I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of here. Small operation, me and 6 hands. I've got a proposition, but it's not what you might be thinking." "What kind of proposition?" Maylin kept her voice steady, professional. Caleb glanced around, then climbed 2 steps up so they were closer to eye level. Up close, she could see the fatigue lines around his eyes, the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "I can't read," he said bluntly. "Can't write either, not beyond signing my name. And it's starting to cost me." Maylin blinked. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't this. "See, there's a man named Victor Hale who owns most of the land around here," Caleb continued. "He's been trying to buy me out for years, and when I wouldn't sell, he started finding other ways to push me off. Legal ways, contract disputes, boundary claims, tax complications, all things that require paperwork and lawyers and being able to read the fine print. I've been relying on people in town to help me, but..." He stopped, jaw tightening. "Let's just say I'm starting to realize that not everyone who offers to help actually has my best interests at heart. You want me to teach you to read?" Maylin felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope yet, but maybe the possibility of it. "More than that. I want you to live at the ranch, teach me and my men, help us understand the contracts and documents that come across my desk. In exchange, you get room and board, and I'll pay you $20 a month." Caleb met her eyes. "It's not much, but it's honest work. And nobody at my ranch is going to care what country your parents came from." $20 a month was actually better than what she'd made teaching school, and room and board meant not sleeping in the street tonight. But Maylin had learned to look for traps, especially in offers that seemed too good. "Why me? There must be other educated people in town who could teach you." "There are." Caleb's mouth twisted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "But they're all friends with Victor Hale, or dependent on his goodwill, or just plain scared of him. I need someone who doesn't owe this town anything, someone who's got no reason to sell me out." He paused. "And someone who knows what it's like to be underestimated." The last part hit harder than Maylin wanted to admit. She studied him, looking for the catch, the hidden agenda, the thing that would reveal this as another trap. But all she saw was a tired man offering a job to a desperate woman, both of them trying to survive in a place that didn't much care whether they did or not. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I need some things understood from the start. This is employment, nothing more. I'll teach you and your men, I'll help with documents and accounts, but I won't be cooking or cleaning or doing anything that might be mistaken for wifely duties." "Fair enough. I've got a housekeeper who handles that anyway." Caleb extended his hand. "We got a deal?" Maylin looked at his hand. Scarred knuckles, dirt under the nails, the roughness of honest work. She thought about the train platform, Morrison's contempt, Widow Chen's closed door. She thought about sleeping on the street tonight with nowhere to go and no money for a ticket back to a city that didn't want her either. She shook his hand. "We have a deal, Mr. Turner. Caleb, if we're going to be working together, might as well use first names." He picked up her suitcase before she could object. "Wagon's this way. We'll head out now, if that's all right with you. I've got supplies to load, but we should make it back to the ranch before dark." Maylin followed him down 2nd Street, aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways. Let them watch. Let them wonder. She'd survived worse than small-town gossip. Caleb's wagon was parked outside the general store, already half-loaded with sacks of flour and beans. He set her suitcase carefully in the back, then went inside to finish his business. Maylin stood beside the wagon, trying to ignore the stares of 2 women across the street who were making no effort to hide their conversation. Chinese woman. Morrison turned her away. "What's Caleb thinking? The door of the general store banged open. Caleb emerged carrying a final sack of grain, followed by a thin man in an apron who was talking at him with the aggressive cheer of someone making a point. Just saying, Turner, people are going to talk. Bringing a Chinese woman out to your ranch. No chaperone. No, Mr. Perkins. Caleb set the grain sack in the wagon with controlled force. I'm hiring a teacher, not asking your permission. You got anything else to say, you can write it down and mail it to me. Oh, wait. You know I can't read letters. Guess we're done here. Perkins's face went red. Now you listen here. No, you listen. Caleb's voice stayed quiet, but something in it made Perkins take a step back. I've been trading with your store for 6 years. Never missed a payment, never caused trouble. What I do on my own land with my own money is my business. We clear? Perkins looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Caleb's expression made him think better of it. He retreated into his store without another word. Caleb climbed into the wagon seat, then offered Mei Lin a hand up. She took it, settling onto the bench beside him. He picked up the reins, clicked his tongue at the horses, and they rolled forward. They were a mile out of town before Mei Lin spoke. Thank you for what you said back there. Didn't do it for thanks. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. Did it because Perkins is an ass who thinks he gets to have an opinion about everyone's life. You'll find a lot of people like that out here. I've encountered them before. I bet you have. He was quiet for a moment. Look, I'm going to be straight with you. This isn't going to be easy. Hale's going to hear about you, probably already has. He's going to try to use it against me, the foreign woman, the scandal, all of it. And the men at the ranch, they're good workers, but they're not exactly progressive in their thinking. They might give you trouble at first. I can handle trouble, Caleb. He glanced at her, something almost like respect in his eyes. Yeah, I'm starting to think you can. The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun started its descent toward evening, a cluster of buildings arranged around a dusty yard with fences stretching out toward grazing land where cattle dotted the brown grass. It was small, like Caleb had said, but well maintained. The barn was sturdy, the fences mended, the house itself a simple 2-story structure that looked like it had been built by someone who valued function over beauty. 2 men emerged from the barn as the wagon pulled into the yard. One was older, maybe 50, with a grizzled beard and suspicious eyes. The other was younger, probably early 20s, with the kind of pretty boy looks that usually came with arrogance to match. Boys, this is Mei Lin Zhao, Caleb said as he climbed down. She's going to be teaching us reading and writing. Mei Lin, this is Frank Webb and Billy Carson. The others are out with the herd. Frank's expression could have curdled milk. Teaching us? That's what I said. We're ranch hands, boss, not school children. Ranch hands who can barely sign their own names. Caleb's tone was mild, but there was steel underneath. Ranch hands who got cheated out of 2 weeks' wages last year because you couldn't read the contract you signed. Ring any bells? Frank's jaw worked. Billy looked at the ground, ears going red. We're going to learn, Caleb continued, all of us. Starting tomorrow night after dinner. Anyone's got a problem with that, you can draw your pay and ride out. Otherwise, show Miss Zhao the same respect you'd show me. He walked toward the house without waiting for a response. Mei Lin grabbed her suitcase and followed, aware of Frank and Billy's stares burning into her back. The house was cleaner than she'd expected. The housekeeper Caleb had mentioned, a stout woman named Margaret, who appeared from the kitchen wiping her hands on her apron, kept things tidy, if not exactly warm. She looked Mei Lin up and down with the same assessment everyone else had given her, but at least didn't say anything rude to her face. Mrs. Margaret, this is Mei Lin. She'll be staying in the spare room upstairs. Can you make sure she's got what she needs? Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. The spare room. Yes. People are going to talk, Mr. Turner. Let them. Caleb was already moving toward his office, a small room off the main hall piled with papers and ledgers. Mei Lin, come here a minute before you settle in. She followed him into the office. The chaos was immediately apparent. Documents stacked haphazardly, some water-stained, others torn, everything covered in a fine layer of dust that spoke of neglect born from inability rather than laziness. This is the problem, Caleb said, gesturing at the mess. 6 years of contracts, tax notices, boundary surveys, correspondence. All of it might as well be Chinese for all I can make of it. Hale sent me a letter last month about some boundary dispute. I had to take it to a lawyer in town to read it for me, and he said it was nothing to worry about. Found out later he's on Hale's payroll. Nearly lost 20 acres because of it. Mei Lin picked up the nearest document. It was a contract for cattle sale, dated 3 months prior, with terms that even her quick scan suggested were unfavorable. This is robbery. Probably. Can't prove it though, can I? Caleb's frustration was palpable. That's why I need you. Not just to teach me letters, but to help me understand what I'm up against. To level the playing field before Hale manages to steal everything I've built. She set the contract down, looking at him directly. Why does Hale want your land so badly? Water. Caleb pointed to a map on the wall, marked with property lines. My ranch sits on top of a spring-fed creek that runs year-round. Most of the water in this territory is seasonal, dries up in summer, floods in spring. But this creek never stops. Whoever controls it controls cattle grazing for miles around. Hale owns everything else in the area, but without my water rights, his empire has a hole in it. So he's trying to force you out legally because he can't do it any other way. Exactly. Caleb met her eyes. And I need to learn how to fight him with the same weapons he's using. Not just fists and guns, but words and laws and all the things I never learned because I was too busy trying to survive. Mei Lin looked around the office again, seeing it differently now. Not just chaos, but a battlefield she actually knew how to navigate. For the first time since stepping off that train, she felt something other than despair. All right, she said. Show me everything. We'll start organizing tonight, and tomorrow we begin lessons. Caleb's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something close to hope. You sure you're up for this? It's not going to be like teaching children. No, Mei Lin agreed. It's going to be harder, because grown men hate admitting they don't know something. They'll resist, they'll complain, they'll make excuses. But if they're smart, if you're smart, you'll push through it, because the alternative is letting men like Victor Hale decide your fate. Sounds like you've got some experience with that. More than I'd like. She turned back to the papers. Where do you keep your current contracts, the ones that are still active? They worked until Margaret called them for dinner. The meal was simple: beef stew, bread, coffee, eaten at a long table in the kitchen with Frank, Billy, and 2 other ranch hands who'd returned from the range. The 2 newcomers were introduced as Tom and Pete, both somewhere in their 30s, both wearing the same expression of confused skepticism when they learned what Mei Lin was there for. No offense, ma'am, Tom said carefully, but I'm not sure what good reading's going to do us. We're cowboys, not clerks. You're men who deserve fair pay for fair work, Mei Lin countered. Can you read your contracts? Do you know if you're being paid what you're owed? Or do you just trust that everyone's being honest with you? Tom shifted uncomfortably. Pete stared at his stew. That's what I thought. Mei Lin kept her voice matter-of-fact, not accusatory. Learning to read isn't about becoming someone else. It's about protecting yourself from people who count on your ignorance. Frank snorted. Fancy words from someone who doesn't know the first thing about ranching. You're right. I don't know anything about ranching. Mei Lin met his hostile gaze. But I know about contracts and arithmetic and how easy it is for educated people to cheat those who can't check their work. So here's my offer. You teach me about ranching, I'll teach you about reading. We'll both end up smarter. There was a long silence, then Billy, of all people, spoke up. I wouldn't mind learning to write letters. Got a girl back in Missouri I'd like to write to properly, not just have someone else do it for me. Then we'll start with letter writing, Mei Lin said. Tomorrow night, after dinner. Bring paper if you have it, otherwise I'll provide it. Caleb caught her eye across the table, and she saw approval there. It felt good, that small acknowledgement, better than she wanted to admit. After dinner, she retreated to the spare room Margaret had grudgingly prepared. It was small but clean, a bed, a washstand, a single window looking out over the ranch yard. Mei Lin unpacked her suitcase, hanging her few dresses in the narrow wardrobe, arranging her books on the bedside table. She sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of men talking in the bunkhouse, the occasional low of cattle settling for the night. Through the window, stars were beginning to appear in a sky bigger than any she'd seen in San Francisco. 24 hours ago, she'd been on a train, terrified but hopeful that Samuel Morrison might be her salvation. Now Morrison was just another man who'd underestimated her, and she was sitting in a ranch house on the Oklahoma frontier, preparing to teach cowboys how to read. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It wasn't the life she'd wanted. But it was hers. And maybe for now, that was enough. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Maylin, you still awake? She opened the door to find Caleb standing in the hallway, holding a stack of books. Thought you might want these. Found them in storage. Belonged to the previous owner. Mostly McGuffey readers and some basic arithmetic texts. Figured they might be useful. Thank you. She took the books, their weight familiar and comforting. Caleb, about tomorrow. Do you want private lessons? Or should I teach you alongside the men? He considered this. Alongside them. If I'm asking them to admit they can't read, I need to do the same. Otherwise, it's just more of the same. Boss man acting like he's better than his workers. That's going to make you vulnerable. They'll see you struggle. Good. Maybe they'll see that struggling isn't shameful. It's just part of learning. He paused. My father used to beat me for not being able to read. Said I was stupid, lazy, worthless. Sent me to work when I was 8 because school was wasted on me. Took me 30 years to understand that I'm not stupid. I just never had a real teacher. Maylin thought about her own father's words, about education being wasted on daughters. My father said something similar, different reasons, same message. Then I guess we're both trying to prove them wrong. Caleb nodded toward the books. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He was halfway down the hall when Maylin called after him. Caleb, why did you really hire me? And don't say it's just because I can read. He turned back, and in the dim lamplight, his expression was hard to read. You want the honest truth? I saw you on that platform, saw Morrison humiliate you, saw the way you held yourself together when most people would have fallen apart. And I thought, there's someone who knows how to fight. That's what I need. Not just a teacher, but a fighter. He left before she could respond. Maylin closed her door and leaned against it, the books pressed to her chest. A fighter. When was the last time anyone had seen her that way? When was the last time she'd seen herself that way? She set the books on the small desk by the window and opened the top one. A McGuffey First Reader, its pages yellowed but intact. Tomorrow, she would begin teaching men who'd probably never wanted to be in a classroom, who would resist and resent and make the process as difficult as possible. But tonight, she allowed herself a small smile, because for the first time in months, she had a purpose that was hers alone. Not marriage, not desperation, not someone else's expectations. Just work. Just teaching. Just the knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be, even if she hadn't known it until now. Outside, the Oklahoma wind picked up, rattling the window in its frame. Maylin opened it, letting the cool night air wash over her face. It smelled different from San Francisco, drier, wilder, touched with dust and grass and possibility. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed. In the bunkhouse, men's voices rose and fell in argument or laughter. And in the main house, Caleb Turner sat in his office, surrounded by papers he couldn't read, fighting a battle he didn't yet know how to win. But he would learn. They both would. And when Victor Hale finally realized what he was up against, it would be too late to stop them. The first lesson nearly ended before it began. Maylin had spent the morning clearing space in the barn's tack room, dragging a table into the center and arranging chairs she'd borrowed from the house. She'd written the alphabet on a large slate board she'd found gathering dust in the storage shed and laid out paper, pencils, and the McGuffey readers in neat rows. By the time the dinner bell rang that evening, everything was ready. The men were not. "This is horse shit," Frank announced, dropping into a chair with enough force to make it creak. "We worked 12 hours today. I'm not sitting through some schoolmarm's lecture about letters I'll never use." "Then leave." Caleb stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Nobody's forcing you." Frank glared but didn't move. Tom and Pete filed in looking uncomfortable, followed by Billy, who at least had the grace to nod at Maylin. Two more ranch hands she hadn't met yet, a wiry Mexican man named Javier and a kid who couldn't be more than 17 called Sam, took seats at the back. 7 men total, counting Caleb. 7 pairs of eyes ranging from openly hostile to deeply skeptical. Maylin picked up a piece of chalk. "We're going to start with your names. Not reading them, writing them. Everyone here can make some kind of mark when they sign contracts, correct?" Grudging nods. "Good. That means you already know the shapes of some letters, even if you don't know what they mean individually. Tom, come up here." Tom looked like she'd asked him to strip naked. "Ma'am, I'm not asking you to perform surgery, just write your name on the board." He shuffled forward, took the chalk like it might bite him, and scrawled something that was maybe a T and possibly an M with a lot of extra lines in between. His face had gone red. There. Happy? Very. Now, Maylin picked up another piece of chalk and wrote Tom in clear, separate letters beside his attempt. You know this says Tom. You've been writing it for years. But do you know that this, she pointed to the T, makes a T sound? And this, the O, makes O? And this makes M? Never thought about it. Most people don't. They just memorize the shape and repeat it. But if you understand how the letters work, you can write anything. Not just your name, but your girl's name in Missouri. And her town. And what you want to say to her. Billy sat up straighter. Maylin spent the next hour breaking down the alphabet into sounds, having each man come up and write a single letter while she corrected their grip, their strokes, their tendency to press so hard the chalk crumbled. Frank complained the entire time. Javier stayed silent but watched everything with sharp attention. Sam made the same mistakes over and over until Caleb quietly moved to stand beside him, showing him how to hold the chalk differently. By the end, they'd made it through A to M. Every man's hand was cramped, and the tension in the room had shifted from outright hostility to exhausted irritation. Tomorrow night we'll finish the alphabet, Maylin said, setting down her chalk. Then we start putting letters into words. For tonight, I want each of you to practice writing your name 10 times before bed. You giving us homework? Frank's tone was incredulous. Yes. Problem with that? We're not children. Then stop acting like learning is beneath you. Maylin met his stare without flinching. Every man in this room has been cheated because he couldn't read a contract. Every single one of you has signed something you didn't understand and hoped for the best. That stops now, but only if you're willing to put in the work. Frank shoved his chair back and stalked out. Tom and Pete followed, muttering. But Javier paused at the door, turning back. Ms. Zhao, thank you. For tonight. It was the first kind thing anyone except Caleb had said to her since she'd arrived. After the others left, Caleb stayed behind, helping her stack the chairs. That went better than I expected. Frank's going to be a problem. Frank's always a problem, but he's also one of the best cattlemen I've ever worked with, so I put up with his mouth. Caleb picked up the slate board, examining the letters still visible on its surface. He'll come around. Or he won't. Either way, the rest of us are going to learn. What about you? Maylin turned to face him. You didn't write anything tonight. Just helped Sam. Figured I'd practice on my own first. Didn't want to slow everyone down. That's an excuse. Caleb's jaw tightened. Maybe it is. You told me you wanted to learn alongside your men. You said it would show them that struggling isn't shameful. Maylin kept her voice gentle but firm. But if you hide your struggle, you're just reinforcing the same hierarchy you said you wanted to break down. He was quiet for a long moment, still holding the slate board. Finally, he set it down and picked up a piece of chalk. All right, show me. They worked for another hour, just the two of them in the lamplight. Caleb's hand was clumsy with the chalk, his letters shaky and uneven. He gripped too tight, broke 3 pieces of chalk and swore under his breath more than once. But he kept trying, kept forming the letters over and over until they started to look less like random scratches and more like actual writing. Good, Maylin said as he finished a shaky but recognizable C-A-L-E-B. Tomorrow, you'll do it again, and it'll be easier. Doesn't feel easier. It never does when you're in the middle of it, but trust me, you're learning faster than you think. Caleb looked at his name on the board, something unreadable crossing his face. My father used to say I had rocks for brains. Said teaching me anything was like trying to teach a mule to dance. Your father was wrong. Yeah. He set down the chalk. Yeah, I'm starting to see that. They walked back to the house together, the night air cool after the stuffiness of the tack room. Margaret had left a lamp burning in the kitchen, and the main house was dark except for a light in Caleb's office. You should get some sleep, Maylin said. Tomorrow's another long day. Same for you, but thanks. For tonight. For all of this. Caleb hesitated, then added, I know this isn't what you signed up for when you answered that advertisement. Neither is this what you expected when you hired a teacher. Maylin allowed herself a small smile. But we're both making it work. She climbed the stairs to her room, her own hand cramped from writing on the board for an hour. Through her window, she could see lamplight in the bunkhouse where the men were presumably attempting their homework, or more likely, complaining about it. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that was equal parts progress and frustration. Every night after dinner, the men gathered in the tack room. Some nights everyone showed up. Some nights it was just Caleb, Billy, and Javier, with the others claiming exhaustion or injury or urgent tasks that couldn't wait. Maylin pushed through regardless, moving from the alphabet to simple words, from words to basic sentences. Frank continued to be a problem, but a different kind than she'd expected. He showed up to every lesson, complained through all of them, but somehow managed to be the fastest learner in the group. His reading comprehension was sharp, his retention excellent. He just seemed constitutionally incapable of admitting that he found any of it useful. "This is a waste of time," he announced one night, 3 weeks in, even as he successfully read an entire paragraph from the McGuffey reader without a single mistake. "Then why are you here?" Maylin asked. "Someone's got to make sure you're not filling their heads with nonsense." Billy snorted. "Admit it, Frank, you like being the best at something again." "Shut your mouth, Carson." But Billy was right, and everyone knew it. Frank might have hated admitting he was learning, but he couldn't hide the satisfaction on his face when he read a passage perfectly or helped Sam sound out a difficult word. The real surprise was Javier. He spoke English fluently but had never learned to read it, and watching letters transform into meaning seemed to genuinely delight him. He stayed late after lessons, asking questions about grammar and pronunciation, bringing Maylin words he'd heard in town and asking her to write them down so he could practice. "My son," he said one night, carefully forming the letters of the boy's name, Miguel. "He is 6 years old, lives with his mother in El Paso. If I could write to him." "You will," Maylin assured him. "Another month, maybe 2, and you'll be writing letters." "You think so?" "I know so." And she was right. 6 weeks after that first disastrous lesson, Javier penned his first letter to his son. Short, simple, but entirely his own words in his own hand. He cried when he finished it, not bothering to hide the tears, and Maylin had to step outside for a moment because the gratitude in his eyes was almost too much to bear. But teaching wasn't the only thing occupying her time. During the days, while the men were out with the cattle, Maylin worked her way through the chaos of Caleb's office. She organized documents by date and type, created a filing system, and began the painstaking process of reading through 6 years of contracts, correspondence, and legal notices. What she found made her furious. "Caleb!" She burst into the kitchen one afternoon where he was drinking coffee with Margaret. "We need to talk about the Henderson contract." He set down his cup. "What about it?" "It's fraud. Outright deliberate fraud." She slapped the document on the table. "Henderson agreed to buy 50 head of cattle at $12 each. You delivered them. But according to this contract, the price is listed as $10 per head." "That can't be right. We shook on 12. "I'm sure you did. But unless you can prove it, this contract says 10, and you've already been paid based on this amount, haven't you?" Caleb's face had gone hard. "Yeah, didn't think to question it because I trusted Henderson to be honest. Henderson's signature is on here, but I'd bet money someone else prepared this contract. Someone who knew you couldn't read it and wouldn't catch the discrepancy." Maylin pulled out another document. "And it's not just Henderson. Look at this, your property tax assessment. The acreage listed is 30 acres more than you actually own. You've been overpaying for 3 years. "How much?" "Roughly $200 total." Caleb swore, a vicious string of profanity that made even Margaret raise her eyebrows. "That son of a bitch. That's Hale's doing. Has to be. He's on the county tax board." "Can you prove it?" "No, but I know it." Caleb stood pacing the kitchen. "What else did you find?" "Enough to make a case that you've been systematically defrauded by multiple parties over several years. The question is what we do about it." "We fight back." Caleb's voice was flat, cold. "We document everything, we find proof, and we make them answer for it." "That's going to draw attention. Hale will know we're onto him." "Good. Let him know. I'm done being the stupid rancher who's easy to cheat." They spent the rest of the afternoon going through records, building a case file. Margaret brought them sandwiches they barely touched, coffee they drank without tasting. By evening, they had a stack of documents that told a clear story. Caleb Turner had been robbed repeatedly by men who counted on his illiteracy to get away with it. That night's lesson had a different energy. Caleb stood at the front of the room with Maylin and told his men exactly what they'd discovered. "For 6 years I've been cheated. he said bluntly. By people I trusted. People who smiled to my face and stole from me behind my back. And they got away with it because I couldn't read the contracts I was signing. The men shifted uncomfortably. They all knew the feeling. But that ends now, because we're not ignorant anymore. We're learning. And every word you can read is one less way someone can steal from you. Caleb picked up a contract from the table. Tonight we're going to read through this together. All of us. And we're going to understand exactly what every single word means so that next time someone puts a paper in front of you, you'll know whether they're being honest or robbing you blind. It was the most engaged lesson they'd had yet. The men leaned forward, asking questions, wanting to understand not just the words, but the tricks, the loopholes, the ways language could be twisted to mean something other than what it seemed. Frank actually participated without complaining once. Sam took notes. Even Tom, who struggled more than most, stayed focused for the entire 2 hours. Afterward, Billy approached Mei Lin as she was cleaning the board. Miss Zhao, I finished that letter to my girl. Would you mind reading it, just to make sure I didn't mess anything up? Of course. He handed her a piece of paper covered in careful, slightly crooked handwriting. The letter was sweet, telling a girl named Lucy about life on the ranch, asking about her family, mentioning that he'd been learning to read and write so he could send her proper letters. There were spelling mistakes and grammar errors, but the sentiment came through clearly. It's good, Billy. She's going to love it. His face lit up. Really? Really. Just fix this word here. She pointed to a misspelled beautiful. And it's perfect. He practically floated out of the tack room. You're good at this, Caleb said, emerging from the shadows where he'd been putting away chairs. Teaching, I mean, not just the mechanics, but making people believe they can actually do it. I had good teachers once, before... She trailed off. Before what? Mei Lin hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding it. They'd been working together for weeks now, living in the same house, building something that felt almost like trust. Before the school board found out I wasn't white and decided that made me unfit to teach children. They didn't fire me outright, too worried about appearances. Just made it clear that my contract wouldn't be renewed and perhaps I should look for opportunities elsewhere. That's why you answered Morrison's advertisement. That, and my fiancé breaking our engagement the same week. Apparently being engaged to a Chinese woman was acceptable when I had a respectable job, but not when I didn't. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She'd thought she was past that particular wound. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Their loss. Morrison's too. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be nice. I'm saying it because it's true. He met her eyes. You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years. And I'm not just talking about the teaching. There was something in his tone that made Mei Lin's breath catch. She busied herself with stacking papers, needing something to do with her hands. We should get back. It's late. Mei Lin, it's late, she repeated more firmly this time. He didn't push. They walked back to the house in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Weighted with things neither of them was ready to say. 2 days later, Victor Hale came to visit. Mei Lin was in the office when she heard horses in the yard. Through the window, she saw 3 men dismount, one older, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from owning everything in sight. The other 2 were clearly hired muscle, the sort of men who got paid to look intimidating. Caleb was in the barn. Margaret was in town. The ranch hands were out on the range. Mei Lin smoothed her skirt and went to answer the door before Hale could knock. His expression when he saw her was almost worth the fear knotting in her stomach. Surprise, followed by quick assessment, followed by the kind of calculated contempt she'd learned to recognize. Well, Hale said, recovering smoothly, you must be the Chinese woman Turner hired. I'm Victor Hale. I own most of the land around here. He said it like she should be impressed. Mei Lin Zhao, and I'm aware of who you are, Mr. Hale. Are you now? It wasn't a question. Is Turner around? I need to discuss some business with him. He's in the barn. I can get him. No need. I'll wait. Hale pushed past her into the house without being invited, his men following. Interesting choice hiring you. Can't imagine what he's thinking, bringing a woman like you out here. People are talking, you know. People always talk. Mei Lin kept her voice level. It's rarely about anything that matters. Hale smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. You're educated. I can hear it in your speech. What's a woman like you doing playing teacher to illiterate cowboys? Teaching them to read, which means they'll be able to read their own contracts from now on. She let that hang in the air between them. His smile faded. Is that so? Mr. Hale? Caleb's voice came from the doorway, hard as iron. Didn't realize you were stopping by. Usually you send a letter first. His eyes flicked to Mei Lin. Everything all right? Fine. Mr. Hale was just introducing himself. How considerate. Caleb stepped into the room, positioning himself slightly in front of Mei Lin. What can I do for you, Hale? Came to make you an offer, same one I've been making for years, but with better terms. Hale pulled a folded document from his jacket. I'm willing to pay you $18,000 for this ranch. That's triple what it's worth, Turner. You could buy land elsewhere, start fresh without all the complications you've been having lately. Complications you've been causing, you mean. Now that's an accusation without proof. Careful making claims like that. Hale set the document on the table. This is a good offer. Better than you deserve, honestly. I suggest you take it. Caleb didn't touch the paper. And I suggest you leave my property. Read the offer first. Oh, wait. Hale's smile was vicious. You can't, can you? Still need someone to read things for you like a child. How about your Chinese woman there? Maybe she can explain it to you. All those big words might be confusing. I said leave. You're making a mistake, Turner. I'm trying to be reasonable here, but my patience has limits. Hale headed for the door, his men trailing behind. He paused at the threshold. Ms. Zhao, a word of advice. You might want to reconsider your employment here. Man who can't even read his own contracts isn't going to hold on to this ranch much longer. Be a shame if you ended up destitute again when he loses everything. The door closed behind him. Caleb stood rigid, fists clenched at his sides. That was a threat, Mei Lin said quietly. Yeah, I noticed. Caleb picked up the document Hale had left, handed it to her. What does it actually say? She scanned it quickly, her stomach sinking. It's not a purchase offer, it's a foreclosure notice. He's claiming you owe him money, $8,000 for a loan you supposedly took out 2 years ago. If you don't pay within 30 days, he's entitled to seize the property. I never took out any loan from Hale. Never would. Do you have proof of that? Caleb's expression told her everything she needed to know. There might be paperwork in the office. I don't know. Someone helped me with finances back then, but you trusted them, to be honest. Mei Lin felt the anger building in her chest. Who helped you? Lawyer in town, named Garrett. The same one who's on Hale's payroll? Yeah, Caleb's voice was hollow. The same one. They spent the rest of the day tearing through the office, looking for any document that might prove Caleb hadn't taken Hale's loan. They found nothing. Either it had been removed or it had never existed in the first place. That night, Caleb stood in front of his men and told them what was happening. Hale's making his move, claims I owe him money I never borrowed, and he's got paperwork to back it up. We've got 30 days to fight this, or I lose the ranch. Frank's reaction was immediate. That's bullshit. You never took money from Hale. I know that, but knowing it and proving it are different things. So what do we do? Billy asked. We learn faster. Caleb looked at Mei Lin. How long until we can read well enough to go through legal documents on our own? Depends on the complexity. Simple contracts, you're almost there. Legal filings like this foreclosure notice? That's more advanced. Specialized vocabulary, deliberate obfuscation, they don't write these to be easily understood. Then teach us the complicated stuff, whatever it takes. That's going to mean longer lessons, harder work. We can handle it, Tom said. The others nodded agreement. Even Frank looked grimly determined. The next few weeks were brutal. Lessons stretched to 3 hours a night, sometimes longer. Mei Lin taught them legal terminology, contract structures, the art of reading between the lines to find the trap. She brought in every legal document from Caleb's office and made them practice reading real contracts, real deeds, real court filings. The men were exhausted, working full days on the range and then cramming their heads full of words and concepts that seemed designed to confuse. But they kept showing up, kept trying, kept pushing through the frustration. Caleb learned fastest of all. He had motivation the others didn't. This was his ranch, his fight, his future on the line. Mei Lin watched him transform from someone who struggled with basic sentences to someone who could read a legal document and understand not just the words, but the intent behind them. Late one night, 2 weeks into their intensive study, she found him still in the office, surrounded by papers, his eyes red from strain. "You need to sleep," she said from the doorway. "Need to find something we can use. There has to be proof somewhere that this loan is fake." "Caleb, we've been through everything twice. If there's proof, it's not here." "Then where is it?" He slammed his hand on the desk, making the papers jump. "I've worked this land for 6 years, built it from nothing, and now some bastard who's never done an honest day's work in his life is going to take it with forged documents and bought lawyers, and there's nothing I can do about it? There might be something you can do." Maylin stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "But it's risky, and it requires trusting me completely." He looked up. "I already trust you completely." The simple certainty in his voice made her chest tight. She pushed past it. "The county keeps copies of all legal documents, loans, deeds, mortgages, everything. If this loan exists, there will be a record at the courthouse. If it doesn't exist, the absence of a record is itself proof of fraud. Hale's men will be watching the courthouse. They'll know if I go asking questions. So don't go yourself. Send me." "Maylin, think about it. I'm just the hired teacher. They might suspect I'm helping you, but they have no proof. And more importantly, I can read every document in that courthouse and understand exactly what I'm looking at. You can't. Not yet." Caleb shook his head. "It's too dangerous. If Hale figures out what you're doing, then he figures it out. But we're running out of time, and this is our best option." She sat across from him. "Trust me to do this, please." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But you're not going alone. Take Javier with you. He's smart, he's loyal, and he can watch your back." "Agreed." 3 days later, Maylin and Javier rode into town. She wore her most respectable dress and carried a leather folder that made her look like she belonged in a courthouse. The clerk who met them was a thin man with suspicious eyes who looked her up and down before speaking. "Help you? I'm conducting research on land transactions in the territory. I need to access your records room." "Research for who?" "Independent study. I'm writing a paper on property law development in Oklahoma Territory." The lie came smoothly. She'd practiced it. The clerk frowned. "We don't usually let just anyone." "I understand your hesitation. However, these are public records, are they not? And I'm happy to pay the standard access fee." She pulled out $3. A small fortune, but worth it. "Would this be sufficient?" Money changed hands. The clerk led them to a dusty back room lined with filing cabinets and bound ledgers. "You've got 2 hours. Don't remove anything from this room." The moment he left, Maylin began her search. Javier stood watch at the door, while she pulled drawer after drawer, scanning documents with the speed of someone who'd spent years reading for a living. She found the ranch deed, found tax records, found every legitimate document related to Caleb's property. But there was no loan, no record of any transaction between Caleb Turner and Victor Hale. Nothing. "Got it," she whispered to Javier. She made careful notes of everything she'd found and everything that was conspicuously absent, then tucked her papers back in the folder. They were almost to the door when she saw it. A different filing cabinet, this one newer than the others, with a small lock on it. "What's in there?" she asked the clerk when he returned. "Private documents. Recent filings that haven't been processed yet. Can I see them?" "No, ma'am. Like I said, they're private," which meant they were exactly where Hale would put a forged loan document if he wanted it on file, but not easily discoverable until it was too late. Maylin smiled at the clerk. "Of course. Thank you for your assistance." They rode back to the ranch in silence. It wasn't until they were in Caleb's office that she told him what she'd found. "The public records show no loan, but there's a locked cabinet with recent filings I couldn't access." "That's where he's hiding it," Caleb said immediately. "Garrett probably filed it recently, backdated to 2 years ago. By the time anyone questions it, Hale will already have the ranch. We need that document. If we can prove it's forged, how? We can't exactly break into the courthouse." Maylin looked at him steadily. "Can't we?" The plan was simple, dangerous, and probably illegal. Caleb hated it. His men hated it. But nobody could think of a better option. 2 nights later, while Javier created a distraction by reporting a supposed break-in at a building on the other side of town, Maylin and Sam, who turned out to have a talent for picking locks, slipped into the courthouse through a back window. The records room was dark, lit only by the thin moonlight through the windows. Sam made quick work of the locked cabinet while Mei Lin kept watch. Inside, exactly where she'd expected, was a loan document dated 2 years prior. Caleb's signature was at the bottom, or at least something that looked enough like his signature to pass casual inspection. But Mei Lin had spent weeks watching Caleb practice writing his name. She knew every loop, every hesitation, every place his hand naturally wanted to go. This signature was close, but it wasn't his. The T was wrong, the angles too sharp. She couldn't take the document, its absence would be noticed immediately, but she could copy it. Her hand shook as she transcribed every word, every clause, every detail onto her own paper by moonlight. They were almost done when voices sounded in the hallway outside. Sam grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the window. They'd just cleared the sill when the door opened, light flooding the room. Mei Lin pressed herself against the building's exterior wall, barely breathing, listening to the clerk mutter about strange noises. It took 10 minutes for him to check the room and leave. 10 minutes that felt like hours. When they finally made it back to the horses Javier had waiting 2 blocks away, Mei Lin's entire body was shaking. "You all right?" Javier asked as he helped her mount. "Fine. Just..." She looked at the papers clutched in her hand. "We got it." Back at the ranch, Caleb spread the copied document across his desk, comparing it to legitimate papers with his real signature. The differences were subtle, but they were there. "This proves it's forged," Mei Lin said. "The signature is wrong. The language in the contract contradicts itself in 2 places, here and here, which suggests it was written quickly by someone who doesn't actually draft legal documents regularly. And most damning, there's no corresponding entry in the public ledger. A loan this size would have required county registration. Will a judge care about any of that? If we present it correctly, yes. But we need a lawyer. Someone who's not in Hale's pocket." Frank, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up. "There's a circuit judge who comes through next month. Name's Harlan Pierce. He's got a reputation for being honest, doesn't take bribes. If we can get in front of him..." "Hale will fight it," Caleb said. "He'll bring his own lawyers, his own evidence. It'll be my word against his, and he's the one with money and influence. Not just your word." Mei Lin looked around the room at the men gathered there. Frank, Tom, Pete, Billy, Javier, Sam. All of them listening, all of them ready. All of us. We stand together, we tell the truth, and we show Judge Pierce that you're not the illiterate rancher Hale thinks he can steamroll anymore. "You really think we can win this?" Billy asked quietly. "I think we have to try." The next 3 weeks were a race against time. During the days, the ranch still needed to run. Cattle still needed tending, fences still needed mending. But the nights belonged to preparation. Mei Lin coached Caleb on how to present himself in court, how to speak clearly and confidently, how to answer questions without getting flustered. They practiced with the other men acting as hostile lawyers, throwing every possible question and accusation at him. Frank was particularly good at playing the aggressive attorney, pushing Caleb until he snapped, then making him start over. "You can't lose your temper in there," Frank warned after one heated session. "That's what they want. They want you to look stupid and angry and out of control. You've got to stay calm no matter what they say. Even when they're lying through their teeth? Especially then." On the morning of the hearing, Mei Lin woke before dawn. She dressed carefully in her best outfit, a dark blue dress, simple and professional. Downstairs, Margaret had made breakfast that no one had much appetite for. The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Hale had brought his lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Whitmore, who looked at Caleb and his group with undisguised contempt. Half the town seemed to have shown up to watch, probably expecting entertainment. Judge Pierce was a weathered man in his 60s with eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Whitmore's opening statement, a smooth recitation of the loan agreement, Caleb's supposed default, the legal right to foreclosure, without expression. Then it was their turn. Caleb stood, and Mei Lin saw his hand tremble slightly before he clenched it into a fist. But his voice was steady when he spoke. "Your Honor, I never took a loan from Victor Hale. That document is a forgery, and I can prove it." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Pierce banged his gavel. "You'll have your chance to present evidence, Mr. Turner. Proceed." What followed was 2 hours of the most tense testimony Mei Lin had ever witnessed. Caleb presented their case methodically. The signature discrepancies, the missing county records, the contradictions in the loan document itself. Whitmore countered with procedural arguments and character attacks, painting Caleb as a desperate man making wild accusations. When Whitmore tried to suggest that Caleb's illiteracy made him an unreliable witness to his own signature, Caleb did something that stopped the entire courtroom cold. He walked to the judge's bench and asked for paper and pen. Then, in front of everyone, he wrote out a full paragraph, copied from the loan document, in clear, steady handwriting. 6 months ago, he said to the courtroom, I couldn't read a word of this, couldn't write my own name properly. But I learned. Because I had a teacher who believed I could, and because I was tired of being taken advantage of. So when Mr. Whitmore suggests I'm too stupid to know my own signature, let me be clear, I know exactly what my signature looks like now, and that, he pointed at the loan document, isn't it? The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Pierce examined both signatures for a long moment. Mr. Whitmore, do you have the original county filing for this loan? Your Honor, the document was filed recently due to an administrative backlog. That's not what I asked. Do you have proof that this loan was registered with the county 2 years ago as required by territorial law? Whitmore hesitated. The county clerk can verify. The county clerk works for the county, not for your client. I want independent verification. Can you provide it? Your Honor, the absence of immediate county filing doesn't invalidate. Answer the question, Counselor. No, Your Honor, but then this court finds that the loan document presented by Mr. Hale lacks sufficient provenance to support a foreclosure action. Judge Pierce's gavel came down hard. Foreclosure petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into the circumstances of this supposed loan and the filing procedures at the county courthouse. If I find evidence of fraud or corruption, there will be consequences. We're adjourned. The courtroom exploded. Mei Lin felt the tension drain out of her so fast she had to grab the rail to stay upright. Beside her, Caleb stood frozen, like he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Hale's face had gone purple with rage. He stood, jabbing a finger at Caleb. This isn't over, Turner. You think you've won, but Mr. Hale, Judge Pierce's voice cut through the noise like a knife. You would be wise to leave this courtroom before I find you in contempt. And you might want to consider that making threats in front of a judge is remarkably poor judgment. Hale left, Whitmore scurrying after him. The moment they were gone, Billy let out a whoop of triumph that set off celebrating throughout the group. Caleb turned to Mei Lin, his expression stunned. We won. You won, she corrected. You stood up there and fought for yourself. I just helped you get ready. No. He took her hands, ignoring the crowded courtroom around them. We did this together, every part of it, and I couldn't have done any of it without you. There was something in his eyes that made her breath catch, something that went beyond gratitude or respect, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Caleb, I know. Not here. Not now. He squeezed her hands once, then let go. But soon. We need to talk. They walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunshine that felt brighter than it had in weeks. The men were already planning a celebration, talking over each other in excitement. Even Frank looked happy, though he tried to hide it behind grumbling about needing to get back to work. But as they rode back to the ranch, Mei Lin felt the first stirrings of unease. They'd won the battle, yes, but Hale wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and men like him always had another move prepared. She just didn't know yet what it would be. The celebration lasted exactly 4 days. On the 5th morning after their courthouse victory, Mei Lin woke to shouting in the yard. She threw on her robe and ran to the window to see smoke rising from the direction of the south pasture. Not the thin white smoke of a campfire, but thick black columns that meant something big was burning. Caleb was already outside, pulling on his boots as he ran. The ranch hands were scrambling from the bunkhouse, some still buttoning their shirts. Mei Lin grabbed her clothes and dressed faster than she ever had, her fingers clumsy with the buttons. By the time she made it downstairs, Margaret was standing on the porch, hand pressed to her mouth. The fence line, she said. Someone set fire to the fence line. The men were already riding hard toward the smoke. Mei Lin could see flames now, eating through the wooden posts that marked the southern boundary of Caleb's property, the same boundary that had been disputed in one of Hale's earlier legal maneuvers. It took them 3 hours to put out the fire, using blankets and dirt and precious water hauled from the creek. By the time the last ember was stamped out, half a mile of fencing was destroyed, and 2 of the men had burns on their hands and arms. Caleb stood looking at the devastation, his face black with soot. This was deliberate. Look at the burn pattern, started in 3 different places at once. Hale? Frank asked, though they all knew the answer. Who else? Caleb kicked at a charred fence post. This is his response to losing in court. Can't take the ranch legally, so he'll make keeping it so expensive I'll have to sell anyway. We rebuild, Tom said quietly. What else can we do? They rebuilt. It took 2 weeks of backbreaking work, cutting new posts, stringing new wire, reinforcing the entire southern boundary. The men worked from dawn until dark, and Mei Lin found herself helping where she could, bringing water, preparing meals when Margaret couldn't keep up, even holding posts steady while the men dug. The night lessons continued, though everyone was exhausted. But now they weren't just learning to read for their own benefit. They were studying property law, looking for legal protections against harassment, documentation requirements for reporting sabotage. If we're going to accuse Hale, we need proof, Caleb said during one late-night session. Real proof, not just suspicions. He's too smart to leave proof, Billy pointed out. Then we make him careless. Mei Lin looked up from the law book she'd been reading. Men like Hale get sloppy when they're angry. He lost in court, lost face in front of the whole town. He's going to want to hurt you back and hurt you visibly. That means he'll escalate. Great, Frank muttered. So we just wait for him to do something worse? No. We watch. We document everything. And when he makes his next move, we're ready. The next move came 2 weeks later, but not in the way any of them expected. Mei Lin was in town, picking up supplies and mail, when she noticed the stares. Not the usual suspicious glances she'd grown accustomed to, but something sharper. Hostile. The woman who ran the general store, who'd always been coldly polite, actually refused to serve her. I think you'd better shop elsewhere, the woman said, her mouth pinched tight. Excuse me? You heard me. We don't serve your kind here. My kind has been shopping here for 2 months without issue. What's changed? The woman's face went red. What's changed is decent people now know what you really are. Teaching isn't all you've been doing out at that ranch, is it? Living in sin with Mr. Turner, corrupting those men with your foreign ways? That's a lie. Mei Lin's voice came out harder than she intended. I'm employed as a teacher. Nothing more. That's not what Mr. Hale says. He's been telling everyone the truth about you, about what really goes on out there. The woman crossed her arms. Now get out of my store. Mei Lin left, her cheeks burning. But the damage was done. As she walked down the street, she heard whispers following her, saw curtains twitch as people looked out to watch her pass. The bank clerk who'd always been friendly suddenly found paperwork that required Caleb's signature before he could give her the ranch mail. She rode back to the ranch with a sick feeling in her stomach, knowing exactly what Hale had done. Character assassination. The oldest weapon against women who stepped outside acceptable boundaries. And in a small frontier town where reputation was everything, it was devastatingly effective. Caleb's reaction when she told him was immediate and volcanic. That son of a bitch. He can't win straight, so he goes after you instead. It's effective, Mei Lin said, trying to keep her voice steady. If the town believes that we're... She couldn't quite say it out loud. Let them believe whatever they want. We know the truth. The truth doesn't matter if everyone's already made up their minds. And this affects you too, Caleb. Your reputation, your business relationships, your ability to trade in town, all of it gets damaged by association with me. He was quiet for a moment, staring out the office window at the ranch he'd fought so hard to keep. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Is he right? What? Hale, is he right about us? Caleb turned to face her. Because I need to be honest with you, Mei Lin. The reason I'm so angry isn't just because he's spreading lies. It's because part of me wishes they weren't lies. The air seemed to leave the room. Mei Lin opened her mouth, closed it, couldn't find words. I know this isn't the time, Caleb continued. I know we've got bigger problems. But if we're going to fight this together, I need you to know where I stand. I care about you, more than I should probably. More than is smart given everything that's happening. And if the whole town's going to believe we're together anyway, don't. Mei Lin's voice cracked. Don't say it like that. Don't make it sound like you're only interested because we're already accused of it. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She was standing now, hands clenched at her sides. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're saying we might as well be together since everyone thinks we are anyway. That's not a declaration, Caleb. That's convenience. You know that's not... He stopped, running his hand through his hair in frustration. I'm saying this all wrong. Then don't say anything at all. Not now. Not when I can't tell if you mean it or if you're just reacting to Hale's accusations. Maylin moved toward the door. I need to think. She spent the rest of the day in her room, staring at the wall, trying to untangle her own feelings from the mess Hale had created. Did she care about Caleb? Yes. She'd be lying if she denied it. Somewhere in the past few months, between teaching lessons and fighting legal battles and building something neither of them had expected, caring had crept up on her. But was she ready to risk everything, her reputation, her safety, her future, on feelings that might just be proximity and gratitude wearing the mask of something deeper? A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Maylin? Margaret's voice, unusually gentle. Can I come in? It's your house. Margaret entered carrying a tea tray. She set it on the small table and sat in the room's only chair, leaving Maylin on the bed. I heard what happened in town. I'm sure the whole county's heard by now. Probably. Margaret poured tea with steady hands. For what it's worth, I don't believe a word of it. Maylin looked up, surprised. You don't? I've been keeping house here for 8 years. I know Mr. Turner's character, and I've been watching you both these past months. Whatever's between you, it's not what Hale's saying. Margaret handed her a cup. But that doesn't mean the situation isn't dangerous for both of you. I know. That's why I should probably leave. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. It's about what's smart, what's safe. That's not what I asked. Margaret's gaze was sharp. Do you want to leave? Maylin wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. No, I don't want to leave. I've never had anything like this before. Work that matters, people who depend on me, a place where I'm more than just tolerated. But wanting something and being able to keep it are two different things. They are. But you're tougher than you give yourself credit for. Margaret stood, smoothing her skirt. Whatever you decide, do it because it's what you want. Not because Hale's trying to scare you away. Men like him count on women being too afraid to fight back. After Margaret left, Maylin sat with her tea and thought about fear. About how much of her life had been shaped by it. Fear of poverty, fear of rejection, fear of being too much or not enough. She'd answered Morrison's advertisement out of fear, had almost left this ranch out of fear. Maybe it was time to stop letting fear make her decisions. She found Caleb in the barn, mucking out stalls with an intensity that suggested he was working off frustration. He looked up when she entered, his expression wary. I'm not leaving, she said without preamble. Hale wants me gone, which means staying is the right thing to do, but we need to be clear about something. Caleb set down the shovel. All right, whatever happens between us, if anything happens, it can't be a reaction to what Hale's doing. It can't be about proving him wrong or right, and it can't be about convenience. She met his eyes. If you meant what you said earlier, then prove it. Court me properly. Give me time to figure out what I want without the pressure of scandals and rumors. Can you do that? A slow smile spread across his face. Yeah, I can do that. Good. Now help me figure out how to fight back against these rumors, because I am not letting Hale run me out of town through gossip. They strategized like it was another legal battle, which in some ways it was. Maylin would continue going to town, head high, refusing to act ashamed. Margaret agreed to accompany her on errands, providing a chaperone that might ease some concerns. And Caleb would make it clear to anyone who'd listen that Maylin was an employee, living in the main house only because there was nowhere else appropriate for a woman to stay. It was a thin defense against determined rumors, but it was something. What they didn't expect was for the ranch hands to take matters into their own hands. Billy showed up in town the next week and apparently punched a man who made a crude comment about Maylin. Tom and Pete got themselves thrown out of the saloon for defending her honor. Even Frank, surly, contrary Frank, apparently told half the general store that anyone who believed Hale's lies was too stupid to deserve an opinion. You didn't have to do that, Maylin told them that night after lessons. Yeah, we did, Billy said firmly. You taught us to read. Taught us we weren't stupid just because we couldn't decipher letters. That's worth defending. Besides, Frank added, Hale's been screwing over people in this town for years. About time someone stood up to him. If he's coming after you, means you're doing something right. But Hale wasn't done. A week later, the county inspector showed up at the ranch, claiming there'd been complaints about health code violations, improper cattle handling, and unsuitable living conditions. The inspection was thorough, invasive, and clearly designed to find something, anything, that could be used against them. They found nothing. The ranch was well maintained, the cattle healthy, the facilities clean, but the inspector promised to return, and everyone knew it was just a matter of time before Hale manufactured some violation they couldn't dispute. "He's trying to bleed us dry," Caleb said after the inspector left. "Death by 1,000 cuts, legal fees, repairs, lost business from the rumors. He's making it too expensive to stay." "Then we need to go on offense," Maylin said. "Stop just defending and start attacking back." How? She'd been thinking about this, turning it over in her mind during sleepless nights. Everything Hale's done, the forged loan, the fence burning, the rumors, it's all part of a pattern. Individually, we can't prove anything. But together? Together it shows systematic harassment aimed at forcing you off your land. If we can document it, present it to Judge Pierce as evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy, you think Pierce would act on it? I think he doesn't like being made a fool of. He ruled in our favor and Hale immediately retaliated. That makes Pierce look weak. Judges don't like looking weak. They spent the next 2 weeks building their case. Every incident, every rumor, every inspection was documented with dates, witnesses, and physical evidence where possible. Maylin taught the men how to write witness statements, how to organize evidence, how to build a narrative that went beyond individual grievances to show a pattern of behavior. Javier turned out to have an unexpected talent for investigation. He talked to other ranchers in the area and discovered 3 others who'd been pushed out by Hale using similar tactics. None of them had been willing to fight back alone, but together, with Caleb's legal victory showing it was possible to win, they started talking. "Hale's got a whole system," Javier reported. "He identifies ranches he wants, usually because of water access or strategic location. Then he makes an offer. If they refuse, he starts making their lives difficult. Most people give up within 6 months. The few who fight, he crushes with legal fees they can't afford." "But we can afford them," Caleb said slowly. "Between what we've saved and what we can pool with the other ranchers, it's not just about money anymore," Maylin interrupted. "It's about showing everyone that Hale isn't untouchable. That's what terrifies him. Not losing one ranch, but losing his reputation for always winning." She was right. As word spread that Caleb was gathering evidence against Hale, the atmosphere in town began to shift. People who'd avoided the ranch hands started talking to them again. Shop owners who'd been hostile became neutral. It wasn't support, exactly, but it was the beginning of doubt about Hale's version of events. And doubt, in a small town, was everything. But Hale had one more card to play, and it was worse than anything they'd anticipated. 3 weeks before Judge Pierce was due to return for the next circuit court session, Caleb received a letter. Not from Hale, but from the territorial marshal's office. Maylin was in the office when he opened it, saw the color drain from his face as he read. "What is it?" He handed her the letter without speaking. She scanned it quickly, her stomach dropping with each line. An investigation had been opened into allegations that Caleb Turner was harboring an illegal immigrant in violation of territorial law. According to the letter, Maylin's immigration status was in question, and she was to present herself for questioning at the marshal's office within 7 days or face arrest. "This is insane," Maylin said, her voice shaking. "I was born in San Francisco. I'm an American citizen. Do you have proof?" The question hit like a fist. She thought of her birth certificate, left behind when she'd fled San Francisco in shame and desperation. Her citizenship papers, if they'd ever existed, would be in city records she had no way to access from Oklahoma Territory. "No," she admitted. "I don't have proof." "Then we get it." Caleb was already moving, pulling maps from his desk. "How long would it take to send for your records from San Francisco?" "Weeks, maybe months, depending on how cooperative the records office is. And that's assuming they'll send them to me at all. Sometimes they require in-person requests." "We don't have months, we have 7 days." The room fell silent. They both knew what this meant. If Maylin couldn't prove her citizenship, the marshal could detain her indefinitely while the investigation proceeded. And in territorial law, investigations could take months or years, especially if someone with influence was encouraging delays. "Hale's paying the marshal," Maylin said quietly, "or threatening him. This isn't about immigration law, it's about removing me before I can testify against him. So we don't let them take you.
Caleb, if I run, it just proves I'm guilty. If you turn yourself in, you disappear into their system and we never see you again. His voice was hard. I'm not letting that happen. You don't get to decide that. This is my choice. Like hell it is. This is Hale trying to destroy everything we've built, and I am not going to stand here and watch him. Stop.
Maylin put her hand on his arm. Listen to me. If I run, they'll use it against you. Harboring a fugitive, obstruction of justice. They'll take your ranch anyway, and you'll end up in jail beside me. We have to be smart about this. Then what do you suggest? She'd been thinking about it, the pieces falling into place even as her heart raced with fear. I go to the marshal's office, but not alone, and not without preparation. We bring witnesses, we bring documentation of everything we have, and we make it clear that this is politically motivated harassment. We get Judge Pierce involved if we can, show that this is Hale retaliating for our legal victory. That's a lot of ifs and maybes. I know, but it's better than running. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into an embrace so sudden and fierce she could barely breathe. I can't lose you, he said into her hair. Not now, not like this. She let herself lean into him for just a moment, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. Then she pulled back. You're not going to lose me. We're going to fight this like we fought everything else. Together, the next 7 days were a blur of frantic preparation. Maylin wrote to every contact she had in San Francisco, begging for help obtaining her birth records. Caleb hired a lawyer, not Garrett this time, but a man from the next county who had no ties to Hale. The other ranchers who'd been gathering evidence agreed to provide statements about Hale's pattern of harassment. And the ranch hands, every single one of them, said they'd accompany Maylin to the marshal's office as witnesses to her character. You don't have to do this, she told them the night before she was due to report. This could get you in trouble too. Then we'll be in trouble together, Tom said. The others nodded agreement. On the 7th day, they rode into town as a group. Caleb, Maylin, all 6 ranch hands, and the lawyer. The marshal's office was a small building near the courthouse, and the marshal himself looked surprised to see so many people file through his door. Miss Zhao. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a bureaucrat's careful expression. You're here about the immigration inquiry. I am, and these gentlemen are here as witnesses to my character and citizenship. Maylin kept her voice steady, the way she'd practiced. I was born in San Francisco in 1870. My parents emigrated legally in 1868. I'm an American citizen. Do you have documentation proving that? Not with me, but I've sent for my birth certificate and citizenship papers from California. They should arrive within the month. The marshal made a note. In the meantime, I'll need you to remain in town where we can monitor your whereabouts. That's not possible. I work at Mr. Turner's ranch. Then perhaps Mr. Turner can find employment for someone whose citizenship isn't in question. The marshal's tone was mild, but the threat was clear. That's when their lawyer stepped forward. Marshal, with all due respect, my client is cooperating fully with your investigation. She's provided you with information about her background and has initiated the process of obtaining documentation. Requiring her to abandon her employment and residence without proof of any crime is beyond your authority. I have discretion in immigration matters. You have discretion to investigate, not to punish someone who hasn't been charged with anything. The lawyer pulled out a document. This is a statement from Judge Harlan Pierce indicating his interest in this case, given the pattern of harassment against Mr. Turner and his employees following their recent legal victory. I think you'll find it instructive. The marshal read the statement, his expression darkening. This is highly irregular. So is opening an immigration investigation based on an anonymous complaint right before a major court case. Coincidences like that tend to interest judges. The lawyer smiled thinly. Miss Zhao will continue with her normal activities while your investigation proceeds. If and when you have evidence of wrongdoing, you know where to find her. Until then, she's entitled to the presumption of innocence. It wasn't a complete victory. The investigation would continue, hanging over Maylin like a sword, but it meant she could go home, could keep working, could keep fighting. As they left the marshal's office, Caleb touched her elbow. You all right? No, but I will be. She looked at the men surrounding them, these cowboys who'd become students and then friends, and now protectors. Thank you, all of you. Hell with Hale, Frank said gruffly. He wants a war, he's got one. The war came to a head 2 weeks later, but not in the courtroom. It came on a dark night when Mei Lin was alone in the ranch house office, working through the last of the documents they'd need for Judge Pierce's return. She heard the horses before she saw them. Too many horses, moving too fast. By the time she reached the window, 6 riders were circling the house, and one was holding a torch. Turner, a voice she didn't recognize. You've got one chance. Send out the Chinese woman and we'll leave peacefully, otherwise things get ugly. Mei Lin's heart hammered. The ranch hands were in the bunkhouse. Caleb was at a neighboring ranch, helping with a difficult calving. Wouldn't be back until morning. She was alone. She could run to the bunkhouse, wake the men, let them handle this. Or she opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The riders shifted, surprised. The one with the torch moved closer, and in the firelight she recognized him, one of Hale's foremen, a mean-faced man named Cutler. Well now, Cutler said, didn't expect you to make it easy. I'm not going anywhere with you. Mei Lin's voice came out steadier than she felt. Whatever Hale's paying you, it's not worth the consequences. Big words for someone who's outnumbered. Am I? Mei Lin gestured toward the bunkhouse, where lights were coming on. By my count, there are 6 of you and 7 of us. And unlike you, my people know which side of the law they're on. The bunkhouse door slammed open. Frank emerged first, rifle in hand, followed by the others. They spread out across the yard, armed and ready. Cutler's horse danced nervously. You're making a mistake, woman. No, you made the mistake when you rode onto private property with weapons and threats. That's trespassing and attempted kidnapping, and there are plenty of witnesses. Mei Lin crossed her arms, channeling every ounce of authority she'd ever possessed. Now get off this land before we give you something to report back to Hale about. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Cutler spat into the dirt and wheeled his horse around. This ain't over. Actually, it is. The new voice came from the darkness beyond the yard. Caleb rode in, flanked by 3 men from the neighboring ranch. I was on my way back when I saw your dust trail. Figured it might be worth investigating. Turner. Cutler's hand moved toward his gun. I wouldn't. Caleb's voice was cold. That's the marshal riding up behind you. Seems he was interested in Judge Pierce's concerns about harassment. Got here just in time to witness an attempted attack on a private residence. Sure enough, the marshal appeared from the road, his deputy beside him. His expression was hard to read, but he positioned himself between the ranch and Cutler's men. Gentlemen, the marshal said, I think it's time you moved along. And Cutler, tell Hale that the next incident on this property results in arrests. We clear? Cutler and his men left without another word. The marshal tipped his hat to Caleb and followed them, presumably to make sure they actually left town. The neighboring ranchers made their excuses and departed, leaving Caleb and his men standing in the yard with Mei Lin still on the porch, adrenaline making her shake now that the immediate danger had passed. Caleb climbed the steps, his face a mask of controlled fury. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. You should have run, should have gotten somewhere safe. There is nowhere safe, Caleb. Don't you see? That's the point. Hale can reach me anywhere unless we stop him. Running just postpones the problem. She was trembling harder now, reaction setting in. So I stood my ground, like you taught me. He pulled her into his arms, and this time she didn't pull away, just held on while the fear and anger worked their way through her system. This ends, Caleb said quietly. Tomorrow we take everything we have to Judge Pierce. Every document, every witness, every piece of evidence, and we don't stop until Hale's the one looking over his shoulder. Agreed. Mei Lin pulled back, wiping at her eyes. But tonight, I need you to do something for me. Anything. Teach me to shoot. He blinked. What? You heard me. I'm not going to be helpless again. If someone comes for me, I want to be able to defend myself. She met his gaze. Can you do that? A slow smile crossed his face. Yeah, I can do that. They spent the rest of the night in the barn, Caleb teaching her the weight and balance of a rifle, the basics of aim and breathing and squeezing the trigger. Mei Lin was a terrible shot at first, flinching at the recoil, missing the target by feet, but she kept trying, kept adjusting, kept learning. By dawn, she could hit the broad side of the barn 3 times out of 5. It wasn't impressive, but it was something, a foundation to build on. As the sun rose over the ranch, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Caleb loaded the last of their evidence into a wagon. Judge Pierce was due in town that afternoon for a special session he'd agreed to hold based on their petition. This was it, their final chance to stop Hale before he destroyed everything they'd built. Maylin washed the gun oil off her hands and changed into her most professional dress. In the mirror, she looked tired, the strain of the past weeks visible in the shadows under her eyes. But she also looked determined, ready. She'd come to Oklahoma Territory with nothing, had been rejected, humiliated, dismissed as worthless. Now she was walking into a courtroom to take down one of the most powerful men in the county, and she was going to win. The courtroom was packed tighter than it had been for the foreclosure hearing. Word had spread that something significant was happening, and half of Guthrie Station had shown up to watch. Maylin could feel the weight of their stares as she walked down the center aisle beside Caleb, carrying the leather folder that held months of documented evidence. Hale was already seated at the defendant's table with Whitmore and two other lawyers she didn't recognize. He looked calm, almost amused, like a man watching a play he'd already seen the ending to. That confidence sent a chill down her spine. Judge Pierce entered, and everyone stood. He looked older than he had a month ago, the lines around his eyes deeper, his expression grim. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom with the air of a man who'd been pushed far enough. "We're here on a petition from Mr. Caleb Turner alleging systematic harassment and criminal conspiracy aimed at forcing him from his property," Pierce said. "Mr. Turner, you have the floor." Their lawyer stood, but it was Caleb who approached the bench. They discussed this. Having Caleb present the case himself would be more powerful than hiding behind a hired professional. It showed he was no longer the illiterate rancher Hale had counted on him being. "Your Honor, over the past 4 months, my property has been sabotaged, my character attacked, and my employees threatened. Each incident by itself might seem like bad luck or personal disputes, but together they form a clear pattern." Caleb's voice was steady, and Maylin felt pride surge through her. This was the man she'd watched struggle to write his own name, now standing in front of a judge and presenting a legal argument. For the next hour, Caleb laid out their case. The forged loan document, the fence burning with its suspicious triple-point ignition pattern. The rumors spread systematically through town. The immigration investigation opened days before this hearing. The attempted raid on the ranch just last night. With each point, he provided documentation, witness statements, physical evidence, dates, and times that showed coordination rather than coincidence. Maylin watched Hale's face slowly shift from amusement to irritation. When Caleb finished, Pierce turned to Hale. "Mr. Hale, these are serious allegations. How do you respond?" Hale stood, and Maylin had to admire his performance. He looked genuinely wounded, a respected businessman unfairly attacked by a paranoid rancher who couldn't accept his own failures. "Your Honor, Mr. Turner has had a difficult few months. I sympathize with that. But his troubles are of his own making. The loan he claims is forged bears his signature. I have witnesses who saw him sign it. The fence fire could have been started by anyone, including disgruntled employees. As for rumors about his living arrangements with Miss Zhao, well," Hale spread his hands. "I'm hardly responsible for what people observe and discuss among themselves." "What about last night's incident?" Pierce asked. "The attempted raid on Turner's ranch? I've heard about that unfortunate incident, but I had nothing to do with it. Mr. Cutler is not in my employment. He's an independent contractor who sometimes does work for various ranchers in the area. If he made poor choices, that's on him, not me." It was smooth, plausible, exactly the kind of defense that worked when there was no hard proof connecting Hale to anything. Maylin felt her stomach sink. They'd known this would be the challenge. Hale was too careful to leave direct evidence, but they had one card left to play. "Your Honor," their lawyer said, standing, "we'd like to call a witness. Mr. Robert Garrett." The courtroom stirred. Garrett, Hale's bought lawyer, sat in the gallery looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He came forward reluctantly, was sworn in, and took the witness stand with all the enthusiasm of a man walking to his own execution. "Mr. Garrett," their lawyer began, "you've served as Mr. Turner's legal counsel in the past, correct?" "On occasion, yes." "And you also do work for Mr. Hale?" Garrett shifted. "I have multiple clients. That's not unusual." "Of course not. But let me ask you this. When Mr. Turner brought you the loan document from Mr. Hale 2 years ago, what advice did you give him? I don't recall specifically. Let me refresh your memory. The lawyer produced a document. This is a notation from the county clerk's office showing that you filed Mr. Hale's loan document on Mr. Turner's behalf in March of last year. Not 2 years ago as the document is dated, but last year. Can you explain that discrepancy? Garrett's face went white. I must have made an error in the filing date. An error that just happened to backdate the loan by a year? That's quite a mistake. The lawyer leaned forward. Or was it intentional? Did Mr. Hale ask you to file a backdated loan document to create leverage against Mr. Turner? I'm not going to answer that. Attorney-client privilege doesn't apply when you're using your position to commit fraud. Judge Pierce's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Mr. Garrett, I'm ordering you to answer the question. Did you knowingly file a fraudulent document? The silence stretched. Garrett looked at Hale, who sat stone-faced, offering no help. Finally, Garrett's shoulders slumped. Yes. Mr. Hale provided the document and told me to file it with last year's date. Said it was a clerical correction for a loan that had been agreed to verbally but never properly documented. And you believe that? I didn't ask questions. He paid well not to ask questions. The courtroom erupted. Judge Pierce's gavel came down hard, over and over, until the noise subsided. Hale's face had gone red, his carefully maintained composure cracking. Your Honor, Whitmore jumped up. My client had no knowledge that Mr. Garrett, your client just got caught red-handed in a conspiracy to commit fraud. Pierce's voice was ice. Sit down, counselor, before I find you in contempt for insulting my intelligence. But Hale wasn't done. He stood, ignoring Whitmore's restraining hand. This is a witch hunt. Turner brings in his Chinese mistress to teach him some tricks, and suddenly he thinks he can take down men who built this territory. Mr. Hale. Pierce's voice could have frozen water. You will not refer to Miss Zhao in that manner in my courtroom. Why? Because the truth is inconvenient. Everyone knows what she is. What I am, Mei Lin said, standing before she could think better of it, is a teacher. What I am is someone who taught illiterate men to read so they could defend themselves against people like you. What I am is sick of men like you deciding that being educated, being female, being Chinese means I don't deserve basic respect. Sit down, Hale sneered. Nobody asked for your... Nobody had to ask. This is my fight, too. You tried to destroy Mr. Turner's ranch to get to his water rights. When that didn't work, you came after me because you knew I was helping him understand your schemes. You thought you could scare me away with rumors and threats and immigration investigations. But you were wrong. She was trembling now, but not with fear. With fury she'd been swallowing for months. I've been underestimated my entire life. By men who thought education was wasted on women, by people who thought my heritage made me less American, by everyone who decided what I was worth based on things I couldn't change. And I'm done being quiet about it. The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Pierce looked at her with something that might have been approval. Even Hale seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Are you finished, Miss Zhao? Pierce asked, not unkindly. Yes, Your Honor. I apologize for the outburst. Don't apologize. I think you've earned the right to speak. Pierce turned back to Hale. Mr. Hale, based on Mr. Garrett's testimony and the evidence presented, I'm finding probable cause for criminal charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. I'm also issuing a restraining order prohibiting you from coming within half a mile of Mr. Turner's property or having any contact with Mr. Turner or his employees. Violation will result in immediate arrest. You can't do this, Hale said, his voice shaking with rage. I have friends, had friends, had influence. You might want to check on that now that everyone knows how you do business. Pierce's gavel came down. We're adjourned. Marshal, please escort Mr. Hale from the courthouse and ensure he understands the terms of the restraining order. The marshal moved forward, but Hale shook him off. I don't need an escort. He turned to Caleb, his face twisted with hatred. This isn't over, Turner. You think you've won, but all you've done is make an enemy you can't afford. I'll take my chances, Caleb said quietly. Hale left, Whitmore and his other lawyers scrambling after him. The courtroom slowly emptied, people filing out in small groups already gossiping about what they'd witnessed. Mei Lin stood still, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won, actually won. Miss Zhao? Judge Pierce called from the bench. A word, if you don't mind. She approached, Caleb beside her. Pierce looked at them both with an expression that was hard to read. That was quite a speech. I'm sorry if I was out of line, Your Honor. You weren't. I should have shut Hale down the moment he started attacking your character, but sometimes it's more effective to let men like him expose themselves. Pierce leaned back. I want you to know that I'm personally going to recommend the territorial marshal drop that immigration investigation. It was clearly harassment, and I won't have my courtroom used to legitimize it. Thank you, Your Honor.
Don't thank me yet. You've made a powerful enemy today. Hale's influence might be damaged, but he's not destroyed. He'll be looking for ways to hit back, and next time he'll be more careful about leaving evidence. Pierce's gaze moved to Caleb. You watch your back, Turner, both of you. We will, Caleb promised. Outside the courthouse, the ranch hands were waiting, along with the 3 other ranchers who'd provided statements. When Caleb and Mei Lin emerged, Billy let out a whoop that drew stares from everyone on the street. Did we win? Frank asked, though the answer was obvious from their faces. We won, Caleb confirmed. The celebration was immediate and loud enough that the shopkeeper across the street came out to tell them to quiet down. But even she was smiling, and Mei Lin realized that the town's attitude had shifted. They weren't heroes exactly, but they were no longer pariahs either. They'd taken on Hale and won, which made them either very brave or very stupid. And in a frontier town, both qualities earned a certain respect. The ride back to the ranch felt different, lighter. Mei Lin watched the familiar landscape roll by, the brown grass, the distant cattle, the endless sky, and felt something settle in her chest. This was home now, not by default or desperation, but by choice. That evening, instead of their usual lesson, there was a celebration. Margaret had prepared a feast, actual roasted chickens, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden she'd been tending. The neighboring ranchers joined them, along with their families, and the house was fuller and louder than it had been since Mei Lin arrived. She found herself in the kitchen helping Margaret with dishes while the men told increasingly exaggerated versions of the courtroom confrontation in the next room. You did good today, Margaret said, scrubbing a pot, standing up like that. I probably shouldn't have lost my temper in front of the judge. Sometimes losing your temper is exactly the right thing to do. Keeps you human. Margaret dried her hands. Can I give you some advice? Of course. That man out there, Margaret gestured toward the other room where Caleb's laugh could be heard. He's in love with you. Has been for a while now. And unless I'm very wrong, you feel the same way. Mei Lin felt heat rise in her cheeks. Margaret, I'm not asking you to confirm or deny it, just pointing out what anyone with eyes can see. And I'm telling you that whatever you're afraid of, scandal, judgment, failure, it's not worth more than what you could have together. Life's too short and too hard out here to waste time on fear. Before Mei Lin could respond, Billy stuck his head in the kitchen. Miss Zhao, Caleb's looking for you. She found him on the porch, away from the noise and celebration inside. He was leaning against the rail, looking out at the darkening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. You all right? She asked, joining him. Yeah, just needed some air. It's been a day. That's an understatement. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Caleb said, What you said in court today about being underestimated your whole life. I felt that. Every word. I know you did. I never thanked you properly for coming here, for staying when you could have left, for teaching me that being illiterate didn't make me stupid. He turned to face her. You changed my life, Mei Lin, and not just because you taught me to read. You changed mine too. Gave me a purpose when I thought I'd lost everything. About that thing I said before, the thing you told me not to say wrong again? Caleb took a breath. I'm in love with you. Not because we work well together, not because you're convenient, not because of what anyone else thinks. I love you because you're brilliant and stubborn, and you refuse to let anyone make you small. I love you because when you could have run, you stood and fought. And I know this probably isn't the right time, and you probably need more time to figure out what you want, but after today I realized life's too unpredictable to waste. So I'm telling you now, I love you. Mei Lin felt tears sting her eyes. You're right, you know. About which part? The timing is terrible. We just survived a court battle. Hale's still out there planning revenge, and we have no idea what's coming next. She smiled through the tears.
But Margaret just told me that life's too short to waste time on fear, and I think she's right. So what are you saying? I'm saying I love you too. I have for a while now, but I was too scared to admit it, too worried about what it would mean, what people would say, whether I was making another mistake. She took his hand, but I'm done being scared. If you want this, if you want us, then so do I. Caleb pulled her close, and she went willingly, feeling his arms wrap around her like safety and home and promise all at once. He kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper, and Mei Lin kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past months. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. So what happens now? I don't know. We figure it out as we go, I guess. That's not much of a plan. No, Mei Lin agreed, but it's ours. The door behind them opened. Frank stood there, took one look at them, and rolled his eyes. About damn time. Now get in here before Billy eats all the pie. That night, after the guests had left and the dishes were cleaned and the ranch had settled into quiet, Mei Lin stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the land that had become hers. The moon was bright enough to see the cattle grazing in the distance, the repaired fence line that marked the southern boundary, the barn where she'd taught her first lesson what felt like a lifetime ago. Tomorrow, Hale would start planning his revenge. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, she let herself just feel grateful. Grateful for a chance encounter with a rancher who saw strength where others saw weakness. Grateful for students who became friends, who became family. Grateful for a future that was uncertain, but hers to shape. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Caleb standing there, looking nervous. I know it's late, and this isn't proper, but he held out a small box. I wanted to give you this now, before I lose my nerve. Inside the box was a simple gold ring, slightly worn, clearly old. It was my mother's, Caleb said. Only thing I have left of her. I know we haven't talked about marriage yet, and I'm not asking for an answer now, but I wanted you to have it, so you'd know I'm serious about this, about us. Mei Lin took the ring, feeling the weight of it, the history. Your mother's ring. She would have liked you. She was educated too, taught school before she married my father. That's where I got my love of learning, even if I couldn't do it myself for a long time. Caleb cleared his throat. Point is, she understood what it meant to be a woman who didn't fit the expected mold. And she would have been proud to see her ring go to someone like you. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything tonight. Just think about it. Think about whether you could see yourself building a life here, not as my employee or even just as my... He stumbled over the words. As my wife, my partner, my equal. Mei Lin looked at the ring, then at Caleb, then back at the ring. 6 months ago, she'd answered an advertisement from a man who'd ended up rejecting her. Had thought her life was over, her options exhausted. Now she was standing in a ranch house in Oklahoma Territory, holding a marriage proposal from a man she loved, with a community of people who respected her, and work that mattered. Ask me again in the morning, she said softly, when we're both thinking clearly and not drunk on victory and emotion. All right, I can do that. Caleb started to leave, then turned back. But just so you know, my answer's not going to change. Morning, noon, or night, I want you in my life. Permanently. After he left, Mei Lin sat on her bed, turning the ring over in her hands. It fit perfectly on her finger, like it had been made for her. Like maybe this had been the plan all along, not the rejection and humiliation, but everything that came after. The teaching, the fighting, the finding of herself in a place she'd never expected to belong. She fell asleep with the ring still on her finger and dreamed of a future that was hers to claim. Morning came too early, with roosters crowing and the sun barely over the horizon. Mei Lin dressed and went downstairs to find Caleb already in the kitchen, drinking coffee and looking like he hadn't slept much either. Morning, he said, and she could hear the question underneath it. Morning. She poured her own coffee, took a breath, and turned to face him. You said to ask you again in the morning. I did. So I'm asking, what exactly are you proposing? Caleb set down his cup. I'm proposing that we get married, that we build this ranch together, run it together, make decisions together. I'm proposing that we keep teaching the men, keep fighting against bastards like Hale who think they can push people around. I'm proposing a partnership where we're both equals, both valued, both free to be exactly who we are. He took her hand. I'm proposing a life, Maylin. Not perfect, probably not easy, but ours. What do you say? She looked at their joined hands, at the ring on her finger that somehow felt right, at the man who'd given her back her purpose and her pride. She thought about everything that had led to this moment, the rejections and humiliations, the small victories and hard-won lessons, the slow building of something that mattered. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. The smile that broke across Caleb's face was worth every fear she'd overcome to get here. He pulled her close, kissing her properly this time, and Maylin let herself feel the full weight of what she was choosing. Not safety, not comfort, not the easy path, but partnership with someone who saw her truly and loved her anyway. A chance to build something lasting in a place that had tried to break them both. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Judge Pierce officiating and the entire crew as witnesses. Margaret cried, which she claimed was absolutely not happening even as tears ran down her face. Frank gave Maylin away since she had no family present, grumbling the entire time but with suspiciously bright eyes. Billy played his harmonica during the vows. The neighboring ranchers came, along with a surprising number of townspeople who'd apparently decided that taking down Hale earned forgiveness for any social impropriety. Even the shopkeeper who'd refused to serve Maylin showed up with a wedding gift, a set of china that she claimed had been gathering dust anyway. There was no honeymoon, they couldn't afford to leave the ranch unguarded, and there was too much work to do. But that night, in the room they now shared, Caleb gave her a different kind of gift. A deed showing that he'd filed paperwork, making her a legal co-owner of the ranch. Thought about this a lot, he said, as she stared at the document. Way I see it, you've earned this as much as I have. You fought for it, bled for it, nearly got arrested for it. It's not a gift. It's recognition of what you've already put in. Caleb, this is... Maylin couldn't finish the sentence. She'd never owned property before, never had her name on anything that mattered. And now she was half owner of a cattle ranch in Oklahoma Territory. It's yours. Ours. He kissed her forehead. Partners, remember? In everything. Over the next few months, they settled into their new reality. Caleb Turner and Maylin Zhao Turner, ranchers and teachers, building something that was equal parts practical and revolutionary. The night lessons continued, but they evolved. Now they were teaching not just reading and writing, but basic law, arithmetic for business, even rudimentary contract drafting. Word spread. Other ranchers started sending their hands to learn. Then shop owners sent their children. Within 6 months, what had started as survival lessons for 6 cowboys had become something bigger. A real school operating out of the ranch's expanded tack room, teaching anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of their ability to pay. Maylin found herself with more students than she could handle alone. So she trained the ranch hands to help. Javier took over basic literacy, Frank taught arithmetic, even Billy started helping younger students with their writing. It wasn't traditional, having cowboys as teachers, but it worked. Hale stayed away, bound by the restraining order and licking his wounds. But Maylin never forgot Judge Pierce's warning. Men like Hale didn't stay down forever. They just got more creative in their revenge. The counterattack came in late autumn, but not from the direction they expected. It wasn't legal maneuvering or property sabotage. It was something far more insidious. A whisper campaign suggesting that the school was improper, that having a Chinese woman teach white children was corrupting them, that parents who sent their kids there were betraying their heritage. Some parents pulled their children out. Not all, but enough to hurt. Maylin tried not to let it show, but Caleb saw the way she went quiet when enrollment dropped, the way she threw herself into teaching the remaining students with almost desperate intensity. They're wrong, he told her one night after a particularly difficult day. The people spreading this poison, they're scared because you're proving that education isn't about where you come from. It's about whether you're willing to learn. Knowing they're wrong doesn't make it hurt less. I know, but you're not alone in this fight. We're not alone. He was right. The response to the whisper campaign came from an unexpected source, the students themselves. The cowboys who'd learned to read wrote letters to the territorial newspaper defending Maylin and the school. Parents whose children had thrived under her teaching spoke out at town meetings. Even some of the other ranchers who'd benefited from having literate workers pushed back against the rumors. It wasn't unanimous support, and it didn't silence everyone. But it was enough Enough to keep the school running, enough to prove that what they'd built had real value, enough to show that change, however uncomfortable, was possible. By winter, the ranch had become something neither Caleb nor Mei Lin had planned, but both recognized as important. A center of learning in a territory that desperately needed it. And in the quiet moments, when the students had gone home and the work was done, they had each other. It wasn't the life Mei Lin had imagined when she stepped off that train 6 months ago. It was harder, messier, more complicated than any fairy tale ending.
But it was real. It was hers. And that made it worth every battle they'd fought to claim it. Spring arrived with unseasonable warmth and a letter that changed everything. Mei Lin was teaching a class of 12 students, 8 children and 4 adults who worked various jobs in town, when Caleb appeared in the doorway of what they now called the schoolhouse. He looked strange, holding an envelope like it might explode. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "Mei Lin, you need to see this." She excused herself, stepping outside where the early morning sun was already heating the air. Caleb handed her the letter without speaking. It was from the Territorial Education Board in Oklahoma City, addressed to Mrs. Mei Lin Zhao Turner. Her hands shook as she read it, then read it again to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. "They want to make it official," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They want to grant us territorial certification as a legitimate school. With funding." Keep reading. She scanned further down. The letter explained that Judge Pierce had written to the board describing the school's success in bringing literacy to an underserved population. Several territorial legislators had taken interest, particularly given the documented improvement in contract disputes and legal understanding among ranchers who'd previously been vulnerable to exploitation. They were offering not just certification, but a grant to expand operations and hire additional teachers. "This is—" Mei Lin couldn't finish. Her throat had closed up with emotion. "This is everything you've been working toward," Caleb said, pulling her close. "Everything you deserve." But that afternoon, as Mei Lin sat in the ranch office reviewing the grant requirements, she felt the first stirrings of unease. The funding came with conditions: curriculum oversight, regular inspections, adherence to territorial education standards, standards that, as she read through them, seemed designed for traditional white students in traditional settings. One section in particular made her stomach drop. All instruction shall be conducted in English, using approved textbooks that reflect American values and cultural heritage. Teachers must demonstrate proficiency in approved pedagogical methods and maintain professional conduct befitting their position. It was bureaucratic language, carefully neutral. But Mei Lin had learned to read between the lines. This was a leash disguised as support. That night, she called a meeting with Caleb and the ranch hands who'd become her assistant teachers. They gathered in the kitchen, coffee cups in hand, while she explained the situation. "So they'll give us money and recognition," Frank said slowly, "but only if we teach the way they want us to teach." "Essentially, yes." "What about the students we have now?" Javier asked. "The ones who can't read English yet? The ones learning at their own pace instead of following some standard curriculum? The regulations suggest they'd need to be restructured. Age-appropriate classes, standardized testing, formal attendance requirements." Mei Lin set down the letter. "Everything that's working now, the flexibility, the individual attention, the fact that a 40-year-old ranch hand can learn alongside a 7-year-old child without shame, that all goes away." "Then we don't take their money," Billy said. "We keep doing what we're doing. Without funding, we can't expand, can't pay additional teachers, can't buy proper books and supplies." Mei Lin felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I could keep teaching, but it would stay small, limited. We'd never reach everyone who needs it." Caleb had been quiet, listening. Now he spoke. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. If we take the funding, we legitimize what we're doing but lose control of how we do it. If we refuse, we maintain our independence but limit our impact." She looked around the table at these men who'd gone from students to colleagues. "I'm asking because this affects all of you too." The discussion stretched past midnight. Tom argued for accepting the funding and working within the system to change it. Pete worried about losing the personal approach that had worked for him. Frank, surprisingly, suggested a compromise: take the money, meet the minimum requirements, but find ways to preserve what made their school different. "Bureaucrats care about paperwork," Frank said. "Long as the paperwork looks right, they don't dig too deep into how you actually run things." It was cynical, but probably accurate.
Still, Mei Lin went to bed that night with no clear answer, just a headache from trying to solve a problem that seemed to have no good solution. 2 days later, the decision was made for her. She was walking back from town, arms full of supplies, when 3 women stepped into her path. She recognized them, wives of prominent townsmen, the kind who organized church socials and decided who was respectable and who wasn't.
Mrs. Turner, the oldest one said, her voice dripping false sweetness. We've been hoping to speak with you about this school you're running. What about it? Well, we've heard that you might be receiving territorial funding, and we wanted to express some concerns. The woman glanced at her companions for support. You understand, of course, that with official recognition comes certain responsibilities, community standards to uphold. I'm aware of the requirements, yes.
Then you'll understand why we feel it's important that the school reflect proper American values, which means, quite frankly, that the teaching staff should also reflect those values. The woman's smile never wavered. We've already written to the education board suggesting that while your work has been admirable, perhaps it's time for more traditionally qualified individuals to take over the actual instruction.
Mei Lin felt ice form in her stomach. You're trying to push me out of my own school. Not at all. We simply think you could serve better in an administrative capacity. Let certified white teachers handle the classroom while you manage the paperwork. It's what's best for the children, after all. What's best for the children is having teachers who actually care about them learning, not about maintaining your idea of proper society.
The woman's smile finally cracked. You are proving exactly why this is necessary. That temper, that attitude. It's not appropriate for someone educating young minds. The board will agree with us. They always do. Mei Lin arrived back at the ranch, shaking with anger, and showed Caleb the letter the women had pressed into her hands before leaving. It was already written, already signed by 20 prominent families, already sent to the territorial board. A formal complaint about her unsuitable influence and requests that certified teachers be hired to replace her.
They're stealing it, she said, pacing the office. They're using the funding as leverage to take over the school and push me out. Can they do that?
If the board listens to them, yes. Official certification means official oversight, and official oversight means people like those women get a say in who's qualified to teach. Mei Lin stopped pacing, feeling defeat settle over her. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not qualified. I taught primary school for 3 years before I got fired. That's it. I never got teaching certification because they didn't certify Chinese teachers in California. I learned by doing, not by meeting some standard.
And you've been brilliant at it. Brilliant doesn't matter if they decide I'm unsuitable. Caleb stood, taking her hands. Then we fight back. We document everything, every student who's learned to read, every contract that's been properly understood, every person whose life improved because of what you taught them. We show the board exactly what this school has accomplished and who accomplished it. That might not be enough. Then we make it enough. What followed was 2 weeks of frantic work. Mei Lin collected testimonials from students and their families. The ranch hands wrote letters describing how literacy had changed their lives. Even some of the neighboring ranchers who'd been skeptical at first provided statements about the measurable improvement in contract literacy among their workers. Judge Pierce, when they approached him, was blunt. The board's going to listen to those women because they represent money and influence. You'll need more than heartwarming stories. You'll need to prove that your methods produce results that meet or exceed the territorial standards. How do I prove that? Test your students. Use the same standardized tests the territory requires for certified schools. Show that your unconventional approach actually works better than the traditional one. It was a gamble. Mei Lin had never taught to a test. She taught to understanding, to practical application. Her students could read contracts and write letters, but could they pass formal examinations designed for traditional classrooms? There was only one way to find out. She spent the next week preparing her students, explaining what was at stake. The adults were terrified. The idea of being tested brought back every bad memory of being called stupid, every moment they'd been made to feel less than. The children were nervous but game. What if we fail? Sam asked quietly. He'd become one of her best students, but his confidence was still fragile. Then we fail, Mei Lin said honestly. But that's not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on a testing system that might not measure what actually matters. We're doing this to prove a point, not to shame anyone. The testing took 2 days.
An inspector from the territorial board administered standardized examinations in reading comprehension, writing, and arithmetic. Maylin wasn't allowed to be present. Conflict of interest. So she spent those 2 days working herself sick with worry, imagining every way this could go wrong. When the inspector finally emerged, his expression was unreadable. Results will be sent to the board within the week. You'll be notified of their decision. That week felt like a year. Maylin threw herself into regular teaching, trying not to think about what would happen if they failed. Caleb tried to reassure her, but she could see the worry in his eyes too. They'd built something important here, and it was about to be judged by people who'd never set foot in their classroom. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Maylin stood in the ranch yard, holding the envelope, unable to make herself open it. Finally, Caleb took it from her and opened it himself. His face went carefully neutral as he read. Then he looked up, and she saw tears in his eyes. "We passed," he said quietly. "Maylin, we didn't just pass, we exceeded the standards. Your students scored an average of 15% higher than traditional schools in reading comprehension and 20% higher in practical arithmetic." She couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was saying. Caleb kept reading. "The board is granting full territorial certification. They're recommending your teaching methods be studied and potentially adopted more widely, and they're requesting that you submit a formal proposal for training other teachers in your approach." What about the complaint? "Dismissed. The board states that results speak louder than credentials, and your results are exceptional." He pulled her into his arms. "You won, Maylin. You actually won." But the victory felt incomplete. That night, lying awake while Caleb slept beside her, Maylin thought about what winning actually meant. Yes, they'd proven their school was effective. Yes, they'd secured funding and recognition. But in the process, they'd also agreed to play by the rules of a system that had never been designed with people like her in mind. The compromise came a month later during a meeting with the territorial education director who'd traveled from Oklahoma City to see the school for himself. He was a thin man named Howard Pemberton, with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful demeanor of someone who'd spent his life navigating bureaucracy. "Mrs. Turner," he said, watching her teach a mixed class of children and adults, "I'll be honest. Your methods are unorthodox. This mixing of age groups, this focus on practical application over rote memorization, it goes against everything we typically recommend." "I know, but it works. The test results prove it works, which puts me in an awkward position." Pemberton removed his glasses, cleaning them while he spoke. "The board wants to fund you, but they also need to maintain standards. So here's what I'm proposing. We grant you certification as an experimental school. You maintain your current methods, but you also agree to document everything: curriculum, outcomes, teaching approaches. You become, essentially, a laboratory for alternative education methods. And in exchange, you get funding, autonomy, and protection from people like those women who tried to push you out. But you also accept oversight, regular inspections, annual reporting, and the understanding that if your results ever fall below standard, the experiment ends." It wasn't perfect. It meant living under constant scrutiny, always having to prove themselves. But it also meant they could continue doing what worked while having the resources to do it better. "I accept," Maylin said. "Good. Because I'm also going to ask you to do something else." Pemberton replaced his glasses. "I want you to train other teachers. Not to replace you, but to spread these methods. We have dozens of small communities across the territory with no schools at all. Traditional certified teachers won't go there. Too remote, too poor, too difficult. But if we can train local people to teach using your approach, we might actually make a difference." "You want me to create a teacher training program? I want you to revolutionize how we think about education in Oklahoma Territory." "Small request, I know." Pemberton smiled slightly. "Think you're up for it?" Maylin thought about the women who'd tried to push her out, about Hale who'd tried to destroy her, about every person who'd ever told her she wasn't enough. Then she thought about her students, cowboys who could now read legal documents, children who saw learning as power rather than punishment, adults who'd reclaimed dignity they'd been told they didn't deserve. "Yes," she said, "I'm up for it." The teacher training program started small, just 6 candidates recruited from across the territory. They were an unlikely group: a former saloon girl, a Mexican ranch hand, a black freedman, a widowed homesteader, and 2 young white women whose poverty had prevented them from getting formal education themselves. None of them would have been accepted into traditional teacher training. All of them understood what it meant to be underestimated. Maylin trained them for 3 months, teaching not just reading and writing, but how to teach reading and writing. How to meet students where they were instead of where a curriculum said they should be. How to recognize that shame was the biggest barrier to learning and dignity was the key to overcoming it. You're not just teaching facts, she told them during one session. You're teaching people that they're capable of learning. That's harder and more important than any specific skill. When the first group of trained teachers left to start schools in their own communities, Maylin felt something shift inside her. This was bigger than one ranch, one classroom, one teacher's determination. This was a movement. But movements attract opposition. The backlash came 6 months into the teacher training program, and it came from a direction Maylin hadn't anticipated. A group of certified teachers from established schools filed a formal complaint with the territorial board, arguing that the experimental program was devaluing proper education credentials and flooding the territory with unqualified instructors who would do more harm than good. The complaint had teeth because it raised legitimate questions. Were 3 months of training sufficient? What quality controls existed? How could they ensure consistency across schools run by teachers with wildly different backgrounds? Pemberton called an emergency meeting at the ranch. He arrived looking exhausted, carrying a stack of documents that represented months of bureaucratic warfare. "They're calling for an audit," he said without preamble. "Full review of every school in your network, every teacher you've trained, every student outcome. And they're demanding that unless we can prove exceptional results across the board, the experimental designation gets revoked." Can they do that? They have enough political support that yes, they can force the issue. And between us, some of their concerns aren't unfounded. We've been moving fast, prioritizing reach over consistency. Some of your trained teachers are brilliant, others are struggling. We need to prove that the average result justifies the approach, not just that the best cases do. Maylin spent the next 2 months visiting every school in their network, observing classes, reviewing student progress, documenting outcomes. What she found was messy, imperfect, and undeniably real. Some schools were thriving, others were barely functional. Most were somewhere in between, not perfect, but making a difference in communities that had previously had nothing. The audit results came back in early winter. Overall student literacy rates in experimental schools averaged 12% below traditional certified schools in formal testing, but they averaged 38% higher in practical application skills. The ability to read a legal contract, write a business letter, perform real-world arithmetic. The gap revealed the fundamental question: what was education supposed to do? Produce students who could pass standardized tests, or produce students who could actually use what they'd learned? The territorial board scheduled a hearing to decide. Both sides would present their case, and the board would vote on whether to continue the experimental program or shut it down in favor of traditional methods. Caleb found Maylin the night before the hearing, sitting in their bedroom with papers spread across the bed, trying to organize her thoughts into something coherent. "You're going to wear yourself out," he said gently. "I need to get this right. If I can't convince them tomorrow, then we'll find another way. But Maylin, you need to understand something." He sat beside her, taking her hand. "Win or lose tomorrow, you've already changed things. There are 15 schools operating right now that wouldn't exist without you. Hundreds of people who can read because you taught someone to teach them. That doesn't go away regardless of what some board decides. It matters what they decide. If they shut us down, it sends a message that unconventional approaches aren't valid, that only traditional credentials matter. Or it sends a message that we need to build something outside their system entirely. Maybe that's the real answer. Stop trying to get their approval and just do the work anyway." Maylin looked at him, this man who'd been illiterate when they met and now read legal documents like a lawyer. "You'd support that? Building something without official recognition?" "I'd support you doing whatever you think is right, but I'd also remind you that you don't need their permission to be a teacher. You never did." The hearing room was packed. One side held the certified teachers and their supporters, dressed professionally, armed with statistics and pedagogical theory. The other side held Maylin's students and trained teachers, a ragtag collection of people who looked exactly like what they were, working folk who'd fought for every scrap of education they'd gotten. The certified teachers presented first. Their argument was compelling. Education required expertise, oversight, and standardized approaches to ensure quality. Well-meaning amateurs, no matter how passionate, couldn't replace properly trained professionals. The experimental program had produced some positive outcomes, but the inconsistency and below-standard test scores demonstrated the danger of lowering qualification requirements. Then it was Mei Lin's turn. She'd prepared a speech, had notes and statistics and carefully reasoned arguments. But standing at the front of that room, looking at the faces of her students, the words she'd planned felt wrong. So she set aside her notes and spoke from something deeper. "I came to Oklahoma Territory because I had nowhere else to go," she began. "I was educated, certified to teach, experienced in the classroom. And none of that mattered because I was Chinese and female and had made the mistake of thinking credentials would protect me from prejudice. The man who'd sent for me took one look and decided I was unsuitable. The town decided I was unsuitable. By every measure that mattered to people in power, I was unsuitable." She could see the certified teachers shifting uncomfortably. Good. Let them be uncomfortable. But a rancher named Caleb Turner saw something different. He saw someone who could teach him to read because he was desperate enough not to care about suitable. And I taught him, and I taught his men, and something happened that changed my understanding of what education actually means. Those cowboys didn't need to know the same things as children in a traditional classroom. They needed to know how to read a contract so they wouldn't get cheated, how to write a letter to family they hadn't seen in years, how to do arithmetic that mattered to their actual lives. And when I taught them those things, they became people who could defend themselves, advocate for themselves, build better lives for themselves. Mei Lin walked to where her first student sat. Frank Webb spent 40 years believing he was stupid because he couldn't read. Now he teaches arithmetic to adults who thought they'd never understand numbers. Javier Mendoza writes letters to his son in 2 languages. Sam Cooper went from barely signing his name to keeping accounts for 3 different ranchers. Billy Carson got married last month to the girl he learned to write letters to. She turned back to the board. The certified teachers are right that our test scores are lower in some areas, but they're measuring the wrong things. They're measuring whether our students can perform well on artificial assessments designed for children in traditional settings. We're measuring whether our students can actually function in the world, read legal documents, understand contracts, write professional correspondence, manage their own affairs. And by those measures, we're succeeding. One of the board members spoke up. But without standards, how do we ensure quality? How do we prevent unqualified people from calling themselves teachers? You don't, Mei Lin said bluntly. You can't. Because qualification isn't about credentials. It's about whether you can actually teach someone something they didn't know before. I've seen formally trained teachers who couldn't connect with their students. And I've seen former saloon girls with 3 months of training change lives because they understood what it meant to be dismissed, and they refused to dismiss anyone else. That's not a system. That's chaos. Maybe. Or maybe the system we've built is designed to keep education in the hands of people who already have power, and we're threatening that by proving education belongs to everyone. Mei Lin felt years of frustration pouring out. You want standards? Fine. Measure whether students can read a legal contract after 1 year of instruction. Measure whether they can write a coherent letter. Measure whether they can do arithmetic well enough to manage a household budget or small business. Those are standards that matter. The rest is just gatekeeping. Bavas! The room erupted in argument. The board called for order, then for a recess. Mei Lin stepped outside into cold November air, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Caleb found her there. That was either brilliant or career suicide. Possibly both. I'm tired of playing their games, tired of proving I deserve to exist in spaces they don't think I belong. She looked at him. If they shut us down, we do what you said. We build it anyway, without their approval. Then I hope you're ready for a fight, because here comes Hale. Victor Hale crossed the yard, flanked by 2 men Mei Lin didn't recognize. He looked older than he had at the trial, his confidence diminished, but not gone. He stopped a careful distance away, respecting the restraining order but making his presence felt. "Mrs. Turner," he said with exaggerated politeness. "Heard you're having some difficulty with the education board." "Nothing I can't handle." "I wonder about that." "See, I've been talking to some of those certified teachers, explaining how your unique approach might be seen as a threat to established standards, how allowing just anyone to claim teaching authority could damage the whole profession." Hale smiled. "But I'm not unreasonable. I'm willing to help smooth things over with the board." "In exchange for what?" "Your husband's ranch sits on valuable water rights, always has. I'm offering fair market value, $30,000. You take the money, close down this experimental school nonsense, and everyone moves on peacefully. Maylin felt Caleb tense beside her. She put a hand on his arm, keeping him calm. Let me make sure I understand. You're offering us money to give up everything we've built and disappear quietly? I'm offering you a way out of an unwinnable situation. The board's going to shut you down anyway. This way you get something for your trouble. Here's what I think, Maylin said, her voice carrying across the yard. I think you're terrified. I think you've spent your whole life controlling people through their ignorance, and the idea that they might become educated enough to fight back scares you more than anything. I think you'd pay anything to make this school go away because educated people are harder to exploit. Hale's mask of politeness cracked. You're making a mistake. No. You made a mistake when you assumed I was someone who could be bought or scared off. I'm not going anywhere. This school isn't going anywhere. And if the board shuts us down, we'll rebuild without them. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You've lost, Hale. Maybe not today. Maybe not in ways you can measure immediately. But every person who learns to read because of this school is someone you can't control anymore. That's the real threat, and you know it. Haley left without another word, his footsteps heavy with frustration. The board took 3 days to deliberate. 3 days during which Maylin continued teaching because the work couldn't wait for bureaucratic decisions. 3 days during which she prepared herself for both victory and defeat. The announcement came by messenger, a formal letter requesting Maylin's presence at the territorial office to receive the board's decision in person. She made the trip to Oklahoma City with Caleb, Pemberton, and a delegation of her trained teachers. They walked into a conference room where the full education board sat waiting, their expressions unreadable. The chairman stood. Mrs. Turner, we've reviewed all testimony, examined the audit results, and debated this matter extensively. The board's decision is as follows. The experimental school program will continue with modifications.
Maylin's heart stuttered. Continue. They were going to let it continue. However, the chairman continued, we are implementing new requirements. All trained teachers must complete a minimum 6-month training program, not 3 months. All experimental schools must achieve at least 80% of traditional school testing benchmarks within 2 years. And Mrs. Turner herself must complete formal teacher certification within 18 months to continue administering the program. It was a compromise, not the unconditional support she'd hoped for, but not the shutdown she'd feared. They could work with this. I accept those conditions, Maylin said. There's one more thing. The chairman picked up a document. Several board members were troubled by the complaint from certified teachers, not because of the experimental program itself, but because of the broader questions it raised about who gets to define educational quality. We're creating a new position, Territorial Director of Alternative Education. Someone who can advocate for unconventional approaches while ensuring they meet acceptable standards. The position requires teaching experience, demonstrated results, and the ability to work within bureaucratic systems while challenging them. He looked directly at Maylin. We'd like to offer you the position. The room went silent. Maylin stood there, processing what had just been offered. A formal position within the territorial education system. Authority to expand alternative teaching methods across Oklahoma. A platform to change education from the inside. It was everything she'd fought for, wrapped in bureaucratic legitimacy. I need to think about it, she said finally. The chairman nodded. You have 1 week to decide, but Mrs. Turner, this is a rare opportunity. We don't often invite people to remake the system from within. On the ride back to the ranch, Caleb was quiet. Finally, he said, You're going to take it, aren't you? I don't know. It means leaving the ranch, moving to Oklahoma City, spending my time in meetings and paperwork instead of teaching. It also means you could actually change things on a scale we never could from one small school. But it means becoming part of the system I've been fighting against. Caleb took her hand. Maybe fighting from outside isn't the only way to win. Maybe sometimes you have to get inside the machine to change how it works. That night, Maylin stood in the schoolhouse they'd built, looking at the chairs where her students sat, the board where she'd written countless lessons, the worn books that had taught so many people to read. This place had become home in ways she'd never expected. But maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe home was the work itself, wherever that work led.
She accepted the position the next morning. The transition took 6 months. Mei-Lin spent that time training her replacement, a woman named Sarah Chen, Chinese like her, who'd been working in a laundry in Kansas City until she heard about the teacher training program. Sarah was sharp, determined, and completely unimpressed by bureaucratic authority, which meant she'd fit perfectly. "You're really going to work for the government?" Sarah asked, skepticism clear in her voice. "I'm really going to try to change the government," Mei-Lin corrected. "There's a difference. And if they try to change you instead?" It was a fair question. Mei-Lin had thought about it a lot. "Then I quit and we rebuild outside the system. But I think it's worth trying this first." The farewell ceremony the ranch held was smaller than Mei-Lin expected. Just the original students, the trained teachers who'd come back for the occasion, and the families whose lives had been touched by the school. No speeches, no formal proceedings, just a gathering of people who'd learned that education was power and power was worth fighting for. Frank, of all people, gave her a gift, a hand-carved wooden pen holder. "Figure you'll be doing a lot of writing in that fancy office," he said gruffly. "Might as well do it properly." Javier presented her with a letter from his son, written in careful Spanish. "He's learning to write because his father learned to write. That's because of you." Billy and his wife Lucy gave her a photograph of their wedding, Billy holding a book of poetry he'd read during the ceremony. "You taught me I was smart enough for her," he said simply. Sam, who was now running accounts for half the ranches in the county, just hugged her. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Caleb drove her to Oklahoma City in their wagon, loaded with the few possessions she'd need for the small apartment the territorial office had arranged. They didn't talk much during the journey. There wasn't much that needed saying. At the door to her new office, a cramped room in a government building that smelled of old paper and bureaucracy, Caleb pulled her close. "This isn't goodbye. I'll visit when I can. You'll come home when you're able. We'll make it work. And if we can't, then we'll figure something else out. We always do." He kissed her, long and deep and full of everything they'd built together. "Go change the world, Mei-Lin. I'll keep the ranch running until you're ready to come back." "What if I never come back?" "Then I'll sell the damn place and follow you wherever you go." He smiled. "We're partners, remember? In everything." The first year in Oklahoma City was harder than Mei-Lin anticipated. She spent her days in meetings with territorial officials who spoke in euphemisms and moved at the pace of glaciers. She navigated political battles over funding allocations and certification requirements. She wrote policy proposals that got rewritten by committees until they barely resembled her original intent. But she also made progress. Slowly, incrementally, she expanded the alternative education program across the territory. She protected her trained teachers from bureaucratic interference. She created standards that measured practical outcomes rather than just test scores. She proved that unconventional methods could work at scale if given proper support. And she built alliances. Other women in the territorial government, mostly relegated to minor positions, who saw in her someone fighting the same battles they were. Progressive legislators who believed education should serve people rather than institutions. Even a few certified teachers who'd been troubled by the rigidity of traditional approaches and welcomed alternatives. 2 years into her tenure, a delegation from the neighboring territories of Kansas and Nebraska came to study Oklahoma's alternative education model. 3 years in, the program expanded to include vocational training, teaching practical skills alongside literacy. 4 years in, student outcomes in experimental schools matched and then exceeded traditional schools in almost every metric that mattered. And 5 years after leaving the ranch, Mei-Lin received a letter that brought everything full circle. It was from Samuel Morrison, the rancher who'd rejected her that first day in Oklahoma territory, the same man who'd called her unsuitable and sent her away in humiliation. The letter was short, written in a careful hand that suggested someone had helped him compose it. "Mrs. Turner," it read, "I'm writing to tell you I was wrong. About you, about what matters in a wife, about everything. My ranch has struggled these past years while I've watched yours thrive. I've heard what you've built and accomplished. I wanted you to know that I recognize my mistake, though I know this apology comes far too late to matter. I hope you have found the success you deserve." Mei-Lin read the letter twice, then filed it away. It didn't hurt anymore, that memory of rejection. If anything, she felt grateful. Morrison's dismissal had pushed her toward Caleb, toward teaching, toward a path she never would have found if he'd accepted her. Sometimes the worst things that happened to you turned out to be the best things in disguise. She wrote back a single sentence. Thank you for the apology. I hope you find what you're looking for. Then she returned to her work. At the end of her 5th year, the Territorial Education Board offered her a promotion, Director of Educational Innovation for the entire territory, with authority to reshape curriculum standards and teacher certification requirements at the highest level. Caleb came to Oklahoma City for the ceremony. He'd sold some cattle, hired additional ranch hands, and arranged to spend 2 weeks in the city. They celebrated quietly in her small apartment, just the two of them and a bottle of whiskey Frank had sent from the ranch. So you're officially in charge now, Caleb said, pouring them each a glass. Officially in charge of trying to change a massive bureaucracy that resists change at every opportunity. Slightly different. Maylin took a drink, feeling the burn. But yes, I have real authority now, enough to actually implement the changes we've been fighting for. You've come a long way from that woman on the train platform. We both have. Caleb set down his glass. I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about selling the ranch. Maylin felt her heart sink. Caleb, no. That ranch is everything you built, was everything I built. But what you're building here is bigger, more important, and I'm tired of being hundreds of miles away from my wife. He took her hand. The ranch runs fine without me now. It's successful enough that I can sell it for good money, and we can buy a house here, together. Really together, not just visits and letters. You'd give up the ranch for me? I'd give up anything for you. But this isn't a sacrifice, it's a choice. I want to be where you are, doing work that matters to both of us. And maybe, he hesitated, maybe it's time I got some formal education myself. I can read and write now, but there's a whole world of learning I've missed. Thought I might enroll in some classes, see what else I can do. Maylin felt tears sting her eyes. You're serious? Completely. We started this journey together. I want to keep going together, wherever that takes us. They sold the ranch 6 months later to Sarah Chen and her husband, who continued running the school alongside the cattle operation. Caleb used part of the proceeds to buy a modest house in Oklahoma City and invested the rest in expanding the alternative education program. He enrolled in adult education classes and discovered a talent for mathematics that led to night courses in accounting. And Maylin continued her work, reshaping education across Oklahoma Territory one policy change at a time. It was slower than she wanted, more frustrating than she'd imagined, and more rewarding than she'd dreamed possible. 10 years after stepping off that train in Guthrie Station, Maylin stood at a podium in the Territorial Capitol building, addressing the legislature about a proposed education reform bill. The chamber was full of officials and citizens, some supportive, some hostile, all listening. Education, she said, looking out at the assembled crowd, is not about producing identical students who can all pass the same tests. It's about giving people the tools they need to build the lives they want. It's about recognizing that a 40-year-old ranch hand and a 7-year-old child might need different approaches to learning the same material. It's about understanding that credentials matter less than results, and results matter less than whether someone's life actually improves because of what they've learned. She could see some legislators nodding, others shaking their heads. That was fine. She wasn't trying to convince everyone, just enough to make progress. This bill proposes expanding alternative education funding across Oklahoma. It proposes measuring success by practical outcomes rather than just standardized testing. And it proposes that teaching qualification should be based on demonstrated ability rather than solely on formal credentials. I'm asking you to support it, not because it's perfect, but because it's better than what we have now. And because the people who need education most are the ones who've been failed by traditional approaches. Tugo vamos pishati. The bill passed by 3 votes. Not overwhelming support, but enough. It was always enough to keep moving forward. That night, Maylin came home to find Caleb at their kitchen table, surrounded by ledgers and financial documents. He'd completed his accounting courses and now worked part-time doing books for small businesses and ranchers who couldn't afford full-time accountants. How'd it go? He asked, looking up. We won. Barely, but we won. Then we celebrate. He stood, pulling her into an embrace. Another victory for the unsuitable woman from the train station. Maylin laughed, feeling the weight of the day lift. You know what the best part is? Those women who tried to push me out of teaching? Two of them have daughters who just enrolled in our teacher training program. They're becoming the kind of teachers their mothers tried to destroy. That's not irony, that's progress. It's both. They made dinner together, talking about their days, planning for the future. Later, as Mei-Lin prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked older. There were lines around her eyes now, gray starting in her hair. But she also looked satisfied in a way she never had before. The woman who'd stepped off that train had been desperate, frightened, convinced that her life was over. She'd thought she needed to be someone's wife to have value, thought she needed permission to matter. She'd been wrong about all of it. What she'd needed was work that mattered, people who saw her worth, and the courage to fight for both even when the entire world seemed determined to prove her unsuitable. She'd found all three, and in finding them, she'd discovered that being unsuitable was the greatest qualification of all. Because suitable meant accepting the world as it was. Unsuitable meant having the audacity to believe it could be better. 15 years after arriving in Oklahoma Territory, Mei-Lin Zhao Turner stood in front of the State Education Board. Oklahoma had achieved statehood 2 years prior and presented her final report before retirement. She was 51 years old, and she'd spent the last decade and a half fighting to reshape education across what had become a state. The report detailed outcomes from over 200 alternative schools across Oklahoma. Literacy rates had increased by 37% in communities served by trained teachers. Economic indicators showed measurable improvement in areas where practical education had given people the tools to negotiate better contracts, manage their finances, and protect themselves from exploitation. The experiment worked, she concluded. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but it worked. Education doesn't belong to the credentialed elite. It belongs to everyone who's willing to learn and everyone who's willing to teach. We've proven that. Now the question is whether you'll continue supporting it or let it die. The board voted unanimously to make alternative education a permanent part of Oklahoma's public school system, with dedicated funding and institutional support. Mei-Lin left the chamber with Caleb beside her, feeling something she'd rarely allowed herself to feel. Pride. Not just in what she'd accomplished, but in who she'd become. The frightened woman on the train platform had transformed into someone who changed laws, shaped policy, and proved that being dismissed didn't mean being defeated. They walked to a small park near the Capitol building and sat on a bench, watching children play. Some of those children attended schools that wouldn't exist without the work Mei-Lin had done. They'd grow up able to read, write, and defend themselves from people who would exploit their ignorance. "So what now?" Caleb asked. "You've changed education across an entire state. Hard to top that."
I'm not trying to top it. I'm just trying to enjoy it. Mei-Lin leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth. "Maybe we take that trip to California you've been talking about. Visit some of the places I grew up. Show you where I came from." "I'd like that. And then maybe we come back and I start teaching again. Not policy or administration, just actual teaching. I miss the classroom." "Even after everything you've accomplished?" "Especially after everything I've accomplished. Because none of it means anything if I lose touch with why I started, helping people learn that they're capable of more than they've been told." She looked at him. "We started this together in a barn, teaching cowboys to read. Maybe it's time to get back to those roots." They opened a small school in Oklahoma City 6 months later, serving adults who'd never learned to read and children whose families couldn't afford traditional education. Mei-Lin taught reading and writing. Caleb taught mathematics and accounting. They hired other teachers, some formally trained, some not, based on one criterion: could they actually teach? The school was small, nothing compared to the territorial programs Mei-Lin had built, but it was hers in a way those larger programs never could be. It was direct, immediate, personal. It was the work that had always mattered most. On the 5-year anniversary of the school's opening, her former students organized a celebration. They came from across Oklahoma. The original cowboys from the ranch, now older and gray but still sharp. The teachers she'd trained, many running their own schools. The families whose lives had changed because someone taught them to read. Frank, now nearly 70, stood to speak. 20 years ago, I thought I was stupid. Thought there was something wrong with my brain because I couldn't make sense of letters. Then this Chinese woman showed up at our ranch and told me I wasn't stupid. I just never had a real teacher. She was right. And she didn't just teach me to read. She taught me I was worth teaching. That's the real gift." Javier spoke next, his son Miguel beside him.
My boy is a teacher now, because his father could write him letters, because his father learned that education was something to value and pass on. That started with Miss Zhao. Billy and Lucy brought their 3 children, all readers. Sam brought the ranch accounts he still kept, showing how literacy had turned into a career. Even some of the certified teachers who'd once opposed Mei Lin showed up to acknowledge that she'd been right. Alternative methods worked when given a real chance. As Mei Lin stood at the front of the room, surrounded by the evidence of 20 years of work, she thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived in Oklahoma. How small she'd felt, how defeated, how certain that her life was over. She'd been wrong about that too. Her life hadn't ended on that train platform. It had begun. And the legacy she'd built, not in buildings or programs or policies, but in the lives she'd changed and the people she'd taught to value their own worth. That legacy would outlive her by generations. That evening, after everyone had left and the school was quiet, Mei Lin and Caleb walked home through streets they'd walked for years. They were both tired, both getting older, both aware that their time for this work was finite. But they'd used that time well. They'd fought for something that mattered. They'd proved that people dismissed as unsuitable could reshape the world if given the chance. And they'd done it together, 2 people who'd started with nothing but each other and built something that would endure long after they were gone. "Do you think it was worth it?" Caleb asked as they climbed the steps to their house. "All the fighting, the frustration, the battles?" Mei Lin looked back at the street where lights were coming on in houses full of people who could read because someone had taught them. "Every single moment," she said, "even the hard ones, especially the hard ones, because that's what made it matter." They went inside, closing the door on the day, opening it to tomorrow. There was always tomorrow, always more work to do, more people to teach, more battles to fight. But for tonight, they had this: a home they'd built, a life they'd chosen, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd made a difference. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything.